Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Field over there.
They have time to get there. Yeah. But so.
Oh, really?
How much time do I get?
So, okay, here you go. Nobody thought to look at this.
We're good?
Everybody else come up.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the South San Francisco Unified School District.
Recording in progress.
There we go. Special meeting and board study session of Wednesday, March 16th, 2022. May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Shay?
Here.
Trustee Murray?
Here.
Trustee Richardson?
Present.
President Baker?
Here. Trustee Murray, will you read the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We acknowledge that the South San Francisco Unified School District is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First People. Item E on the agenda is public comments. As this is a special meeting, public comments are limited to items on the agenda. Do we have any public comment? Seeing none and seeing no raised hands, I will move on to information and discussion administration item A. 21-22 effective governance with an equity lens 2.0 session number 3.
I am going to just turn it over to you wonderful, brilliant ladies and get us started since we're a little behind.
Oh, no worries. And I'm gonna turn to Deborah Keith. But I just wanna say good afternoon, good evening, I should say. It's so good to see you all again, in person again. And just hope you all are staying encouraged on the journey as a governance team and continue to move forward with your equity lens. We're always excited to support you on the journey and want to kind of continue today with using your book study as an opportunity to focus again on good governance. Deborah's gonna walk you through that. And hopefully y'all got to do your homework. And then ultimately, we are going to shift to the equity policy statement work to make sure that you all feel like you know your role as a governance team in terms of how you do equity work. And that's through the policy work. So I'll share a little bit with you after your book study, okay? So because we want to jump right in, I'm going to hush and pass the mic to my fearless colleague, Deborah, who's all the way here again from Tennessee. Hanging out with us in California. It's always an honor to work with her and doing this great work with you all, so.
All right. Well, good to see everyone again, right? You guys see your books? Where are your books? Where are those books? All righty, that's what I wanted to see. I want them to start looking a little frail, you know? You know that favorite toy we talk about? Okay.
Mine's all marked up.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. You're just so neat about yours. Just open it up, put a little crease in it, and that's okay. So again, we're so glad to be here with you and continuing on the journey of your board governance. The book study, which really digs deep into what governance is and all of your roles and responsibilities. And so I'll have a PowerPoint that we'll follow, but there's also some interaction that will take place, so it's not going to be a sit and get type of thing. So we'll be as creative in moving around and having some dialogue with each other as possible. And so your assignment was to read chapters 4 through 6. And so I'm going to share my screen and kind of go from there. Still close now. Right there. Yeah, that's what I want you to see. So just as an overview from last time we were here, and that was, I don't remember, was it January?
Was it January?
January.
January. I said happy new year to you.
Virtually.
Right?
November, January.
Yeah. And so we talked about we did 1 through 3 at that time, so just gonna do an overview of those 3 chapters, and then, like I said, we're gonna go into chapters 4 through 6, which is highlighting welcoming new trustees, and Trustee Shay is the newest. So you will be in that seat and be able to share your experience. And after tonight, you won't be able to say you're a new trustee. So, but we don't want to skip over that chapter because it's always good to know, because there's information in there about not only what new trustees should focus on, but what are the veterans, if you will, trustees should focus on, and how do you onboard actually your newest colleague. So we'll kind of talk about that. And so the whole idea is, the whole book itself about governance, the unity of purpose. This is where we're trying to get to. Our vision is of a governance system, school board and superintendent working together as a cohesive, unified team with a common vision driven by a shared moral imperative. And just that statement there, when I read that to you, you're listening to it, what resonates the most with you? Just that statement there, what does that mean to you?
Means that
Excuse me. Well, when I come here, I leave a few things at the door. And I try real hard not to bring my personal experiences and just focus on that. What did you call it? Unity of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I do. And sometimes it's very difficult. And I find myself drifting off into another way that I thought my first day, the difference between the first day I was here and after I had these classes, I began to train my thoughts to unity of purpose, all these other things, I forgot what she said. That's what I do. That's how I do it.
And engaging with your colleagues, and when you say you leave, what do you leave at the door? Because it is important to bring your whole self, right? Because all of you have your own lived experiences, you have your professional background, which adds to the richness of a team. So it's not that you leave behind who you are, but I think what you're saying is too, you want to at least make sure that it's just not all about what Mina wants, right? Listening to you. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. Does that sound like that's what it is?
Yes. And when I see the agenda, I try to, but then that's where I look at the finances and I'm very focused on that. Because I remember that we had issues with money in the district, and to me that's very important. And I have kind of kept that, but I very much follow the finances in the district more than anybody else probably.
And that's good, because that's a part of everyone's responsibility, being good stewards of that budget, right? And so perhaps, and hopefully everyone's looking at it, but you may pick up something that others didn't see, and that's what it looks like when you're sharing information with the whole team. It's not that anyone, of course, is saying they know more than the other, but if you have an expertise in a specific area, that's okay.
Actually, I don't have an expertise.
Is that just something you like to pay attention to?
What I am is a taxpayer, and I see that.
Well, okay. Well, you have an interest in that.
I look at
And that's-
my property bills
There
every
you go.
year,
That's okay. Yeah, and then,
I was just gonna say that, what it means to me is that we all come from different backgrounds, different perspectives. And we bring them to the meeting to, and work towards a common goal. We can all have different opinions and we can vote differently, but we we have our goal, moral imperative in mind and common vision.
Common vision.
Different.
And remember with the moral imperative, how would you describe that? You remember some of the key things it was saying about what is moral imperative? That you have to focus on, remember the 3-letter word, the why. Why do I do what I do? That's basically what, if you sum it all up into those several pages, it's like they're talking about the why.
I know.
And that's okay.
It's been a while, but.
Yeah, that's okay, that's okay.
But our moral imperative is to watch out for the students
The students.
and to do what's best for students. And
Absolutely.
that's why we're here.
You know that why, absolutely. See, I knew you were gonna say it, that's why we're here. Absolutely, and that's saying focus on the moral imperative. It will make you kind of sit back and think about, even if you find yourself losing your way at times, depending on what's happening, and all of us have been tested, to kind of pause a little bit and just say, okay, why am I here? Am I shifting too much to what the adults want? Because we all have to pause every now and then because we get sidetracked. And so when you bring yourself back to center point and just think, why did I take this oath? Why did I volunteer to take this job that does not pay my mortgage or anything like that? Barely probably gonna put gas in your tank, right? You're not taking water bill. And it's because you care about children. And that's the common theme that if there's ever any missing each other in your conversation, you find that commonality there. It is that we are all here for kids. And if you center yourself back to that, then you will find your way to say, okay, let's do what's best for children because I'm gonna remove what I want and do what's best. Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. Go ahead.
I mean, you guys, Pat, and you kind of stole my thunder because
Okay.
that mission statement, you could put a period after the word
Yep.
vision, and it's still a strong description of unity and purpose. But that very last subclause, the driven by a shared moral imperative, is really what we need to focus on, that we're here to educate the kids, to help the kids in their life. And everything else revolves around that.
Absolutely. Again, keep in focus when you think about any of the children that either you've engaged with or just envision those faces. You know, that should make any adult really get right when we've been misbehaving as adults. When you see those babies looking back at you, saying, really? You know, and reminding yourself you're doing this for me because you are the voice for me. I'm not old enough to vote for you, but I'm really your constituent. I just couldn't push that button for you. So again, just a reminder to remember, this is why we are doing what we do. Because it is going to be something else that's going to test you. You know, we're not, the cloud of the pandemic is still around us. You think about the Charlie Brown cartoon where the one, who's the thing with all the dirt kick up? You know, and it's always around him. And that's what this thing is probably gonna do, but that's how I envision it. It's this thing, it will not go away. You know, or I'm learning when I come to California and Nicole reminds me of, I say, where all of a sudden did that fog come from? It was sunshiny a few minutes ago, then it's just, just wait a few minutes, it's gonna burn off, but then here something else rolls in. So saying all that to say, it's going to be something else. But the board's role, as we shared before, it does not change. No matter what it is, because it's still the superintendent's responsibility to create a safe learning environment for all children, no matter what, right? Well, thank you. Say, what do you have to say?
Yes, I do.
What would you say?
So when I say that, not only everyone's all talking about the moral imperative, that's why we are here. Without kids, students, we don't have any business. And then another one is work with not only board member together, but work with superintendent. I think that is another very important element that superintendent really is doing the job. And we are there to support her. Without superintendent, there's no this organization.
Absolutely.
And then cohesiveness and unified team. I so appreciate every member here. And I never been in the board, but this is my first time. But I just see everyone has something to contribute, and I really admire that.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mina always focus on financial, which is excellent. So every time when she asks questions, I say, whoa, I did not, I missed that. Oh, I missed that.
Mhm.
So, and then we all have our different focus and strength, even though we may not have technical skill on certain area, but that brings a beautiful color to this team. And then it's just, Dr. Moore has to manage all of us. That probably is the most exciting part. And then we have this great team and a great leader, and it feels like Ted say, we agree on disagree, and then we all come from different backgrounds, and that's why it's so rich, and then provide different perspective and moving this district forward. So I'm so lucky to be the new one, and then with all the mentors here guiding me. So it's really honored to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciate you mentioning the support of your superintendent, because that's what this team is to do. With this being your only employee, why wouldn't you make sure she has everything she needs? Because again, as we've shared before, if this seat becomes a revolving door, it is not this seat's problem, we know, right? That there's a challenge, so we have to start looking at then what are we doing? Are we pushing them away? Are we not clear on what we want them to do? Why is it that they just can't get it right, but they are the education expert?
Yeah.
And we're not. So Jeff having, being able to reflect on, okay, and it's okay, because it's not about saying, it's okay to admit we got this wrong. So let's pause and make sure, superintendent, what do you need to be successful? Our expectations are still here. No one lowers the bar for the kids, for the superintendent, for staff. No need to lower the bar, but it's just a matter of making sure she has what she needs to be successful. So I really appreciate you saying that. And then being inclusive of your team on what role they play in supporting you, helping you be successful, because you can't have one person where there's a chink in the link, if you will, it's about to break. It's all loose, it's ravel, it's going to fall apart. So everyone have to embrace, like, what do you need to make it, safe for you? What do you need to, if you don't understand this, and vice versa. And that's what, and even from a new board member's perspective, which we'll have a chance to have you say, share, what do you see, having a new perspective, a fresh look at things, that your board members, it might be an aha moment. Like, I never even really thought, because I never had to look at it that way. So that's that balance of that cohesion of making sure you work as a cohesive team. So I really appreciate that. What's the what say you? What are your thoughts?
The nice thing about going last is that a lot of things have already
already
been
been
said, so
said.
ditto. No, I was gonna actually communicate on the same thing Dr. Shea did. I think what struck me was working together as a cohesive, unified team, and that we don't always have to agree. We may not always see things exactly the same way. We might debate, fearlessly at a board meeting, but then when we walk out of there, right, and we're in the community and people wanna, well, can you believe that board member, we are a unified team.
Yeah.
And so this is the way we voted, this is the work that we're going to do. And so that stood out to me, of course, with the why always as kind of what's undergirding and driving everything else. So that, I just think it's really important, because to your point about if there's a weak link, people know that, and then they're gonna try to leverage that to start getting personal agendas pushed and so forth, so.
Absolutely. And it is so important to make sure that everybody's okay. Because some days when you come to the meeting, you're not okay. And and I should have remembered to just, and usually I like to start to ask you, how are you doing? So I'm gonna stop right there. How are you doing?
Okay.
Now, remember how we say, if you're not okay, it's okay to say that you're not. So how are you doing?
I'm here.
Okay, and that's what, okay, that's fair. Nina, how are you? How are you?
Okay, I need a vacation.
Okay, see, we're gonna speak truth here, okay?
I remember you said that, and I
Yes.
really do
Yeah.
speak my truth.
You do.
Sometimes it get me in trouble, but.
It's your truth. It's yours. Well, how is John?
I'm doing well. I am on the right side of being overwhelmed. You know, it's been a hard time the last few weeks because my wife has a new job. She's a deputy director of a state agency, and she has been very busy with the coronavirus and the recovery. So I've had to take up a lot of what used to be more shared responsibilities on top of being a real, I'm sorry, I don't want to say
Not a real
a day job
A real
and on the board. So, but I'm hanging in there and looking forward to that vacation that Nina needs to take because I wanted to.
Yeah.
All right. And how are you, Mateo? How are you
I
doing?
am exceptionally blessed, like my wonderful colleagues here, I am exhausted. And what I'm realizing, it is a challenge trying to be a superintendent in a pandemic, trying to be a super mom, right, a super wife. And it's hard sometimes to juggle all of them and feel really exceptional about it.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like we have to write a new description of what super means, so that they're not expecting you to have this S on your chest. They're like, no, that is not what super means. Let me tell you what super means.
Right.
If I get to it, I get to it. Exactly, there you go. How are you?
I'm doing well, exhausted, but I'm doing well. Mentally, physically tired, but mentally still pretty good. My day job is good, very excited on different projects, and then reading those books kind of fill you in more. So physically it's tired, but mentally it's very active. And my husband came back from Taiwan, so that's a plus.
I can see the smile in your, through the mask, I can tell. That's awesome. How are you, Nicole?
I'm like Nina, wherever Nina decides to go, just bring me with you. But I'm excited, very similar, excited, physically exhausted, but mentally always excited, and watching you all in action just confirms the work. So it's like even the exhaustion is okay, right? Because it's for a good reason, and so just But overall, I'm also blessed that I'm not complaining. So thanks for asking.
How are you doing?
I'm like, if they don't ask me, I'm gonna say, I'm fine, so thanks for asking. Well, I am happy now because I'll tell you, with an hour ago, I gracefully fell downstairs.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, you missed the part. I said gracefully. I let go of everything and I held onto the rail and just let it go. I was just so angry that my heels broke.
Oh.
And that ibuprofen is working wonderfully. It's like, you know how you make a move and some, it's like, I have not moved those muscles in a while, so, but I'm good. I'm sure that's all that's in there. So no, I'm fine. Yeah, actually there's only 2 stairs left. I was carrying a suitcase and walking and talking, and heel got caught, and it went down. I'm like, gracefully. Even the lady behind me, she says, "Oh my gosh, did that?" Like, almost want to say that looked really nice. You were gracefully falling.
But if you're gonna fall, I guess that's a good way to
Yeah,
fall.
so when you get lemons, make lemonade.
Exactly.
And that's how I have to look at it, so it could have been worse, because I'm not 20 anymore, like 3 times. But anywho,
She scared her colleague too.
She did. yeah,
My heart finally stopped.
and she was just like,
30 minutes ago.
"Are you okay?" I said, "My shoes, my heels, my beautiful boots." But anyway,
We should probably
all's
recommend
good.
some good local shoes.
Yeah, and so she had to go to the
We
store.
did visit one.
We did visit one on our
Picture
way here. I
nice
got some
San
new shoes
Francisco.
on. So
They're
anyway.
not heels though.
They're not heels, so yeah. So it's good that we're all okay. We're here because that's what's important, because all the work that you're doing, if you're not in a good space, you can't get done. It just doesn't matter. So we have to be able to pause and just recognize when you're tired, and it's okay to say, "I just can't take one more thing." I probably hear that from your staff. And you can just sit there, it's like, "Okay, I will wait. Give them a few minutes." No, just kidding. Like, okay, I hear you, but whatever you need to regroup, it's so important to do that. And so just quickly, just looking at these important questions just to consider about unity of purpose when we talked about, but it's all about the mindset. And that's what this core governance book talked about. the governance mindset, and it will make you think about as we go further into these chapters, you know, to be reflective, to say, do I have the capacity to do this work? You know, the framework of governing is in place. And so it doesn't matter what any individual comes in and say, well, I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it my way. And always think about when you want to get on a basketball team and you don't like the rules that the coach, you know, puts in place. What do they tell you? You don't want to abide by the rules. Well, you can either ride the bench or you can not show up, you know, but not saying that that's what's going to happen, but just that mindset is already structured and it's a reason that it's in place. So the key thing, what I always like to share with boards, is not giving you a whole list of all the things you can't do. There's so much that you are responsible for. And if it's not happening, that 30,000 foot view, it's going to be difficult for your superintendent to be successful. So just thinking of just these 10 important questions to consider about, you know, the mindset. Out of these 10, which one, if you had to pick one, really resonates with you, that make you would think about a lot, like, what do we as a governing body stand for, that really helps you stay centered? Again, addressing the mindset. Which one would resonate the most with you? Go ahead.
Well, that's probably cheating, but I will say the one you just said.
Oh, okay, that's the one you
What do
I
we-
like that one too.
What do we as a governing board stand for?
Yeah.
Because that will influence every other
Absolutely.
factor there. You know, what are we most proud of? You know, what do we want to accomplish? You know, how do we be perceived?
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
I would say, what are we most proud of in our organization? And we've been through a hard couple of years and we have continued to work on do our equity work and take care of the children and I mean, we just keep moving forward and I think that that's something to be proud of. And as I said, it's been hard, still hard, but we're doing it.
Right.
And we're doing it, I think, at a high level, so.
And finding time to share your wins, some of the good things that are going on, so that it's not just all gloom and doom.
Yeah.
Yes, you have to share that information because that's the reality of some things, but the wins, the things that you have accomplished gets lost in there. So over the last 2 years, yes, we've been talking about COVID and everything, but you mean to tell me nothing good has happened in 2 years? If that's the answer in any district, maybe you need to lock the doors, you know, because I'm going to question whether you're really educating children. I know that there's some wins. There's some wins in the classroom what the teachers can celebrate, but are they ever asked those questions? What, just carving out space to say, well, yes, we know all of this is occurring, but let's share something good that you're proud of. You know, teachers and principals, let everyone have that opportunity. Yes. Any other thoughts? Which one, Sharon? What you think of?
Number 9.
Number 9?
What legacy do we want our governance team to leave? So, because we are all official elected, so we will not stay here forever. And so, whatever team, the composition, and with superintendent, I would like to think future and also go backward. What do we left for the future community to remember?
Absolutely. Legacy is key, is so important. And you have a great team together work with your superintendent. Yes, it's going to be, it takes time to see the fruits of your labor, if you will. But I always like to make board members think about when you're building a home, you have this beautiful home, but you do know that they had to dig the foundation, pour all in the cement, and if it rains, which you guys don't get much rain out here, but when it rains, you cannot pour cement for a while. You gotta wait it out. But the key thing is I watched when, you know, the HGTV, you know, or something like that when they're building, and it was raining a lot, so they had to pull the water, track the water out, put the cement back in and wait. I mean, it was just a whole process before you put the beams in. But once that's done, the foundation is there. And that's what you guys are building. No one may not see that yet, but it's going to stand the test of time, sustainability, when you get that foundation in. So if you think about it that way, yep, we're structuring, we're putting everything in place. So if and when you decide not to be on the board again, it shouldn't matter. And I always like to say it should not matter that what other board member or a superintendent, because it's not like you know, if you're superintendent, cause she's not, she's going to leave, I'm just gonna put that out there. Don't take that the wrong way, she is not. But any superintendent, if they chose to leave for whatever reason, it's about passing the gap. It's not like, oh, new leader, we're gonna go in a whole new way. And the board should never allow that to happen. But you too, you also have to make sure that you're building the culture where anyone who thinks they wanna be a part of the team, they're gonna have a clear understanding of how you operate. Because you shored up the foundation, right? So just kind of thinking about that, so that's legacy, that's powerful. Nina, and John, what do you think?
Well, I just think that we have been, everything that we do is really transactional.
Mhm.
And we're just players, and we just have to do what we've been expected to do. And there's little room for anything else like personal wants and personal, like that one that we were talking about, what do we want to accomplish? And some of these items that kind of could border on the fact that we could bring our own biases to it when there's already a script actually. And we just have to follow it because we got policy, we got norms.
Yep, they're already in place.
Protocols and, you know, almost everything we do, it's spoken for.
There's a framework that's already
And
in
if
place,
there's anything that you
absolutely.
doubt, you just go in there and check it out.
Get your handbook out, and look at this,
That's
right?
right. I always open that book because of that, because I go, oh my God, I don't know. And then I open it up and there's a passage in there that calms me down.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, you guys hear that now. When you see Nina going out, you guys just do this, get your book up, like Nina, come on. Thank you for sharing that, that's powerful, that's awesome. Because you're right, and I always say a framework, but I really like it, there's a script. So there's no need for anyone to come, I'm coming in here and I'm gonna do X, Y, Z. There's no need to do that.
The problem comes in there when people try to tweak it. Oh, I said, we got policy there.
There you go.
You know, we don't have to think about it. Let's just,
Follow.
policy says. And I was told, hey, you can't do that because policy. I said, okay, well, I just have to find another way. We'll make a policy.
I was gonna say, there's a way, as long as it connects with, you know.
Then convince everyone else.
Absolutely.
But you know, like I said, I just can't, to me, there's little wiggle room for something that I want. Basically, we're told, hey, we gotta accomplish this, there's a goal, the superintendent has to do that. Oh, but the problem I see is that we have issues with prior boards and we're cleaning up essentially some of the mistakes in the past. And what we're doing now is adhere more to protocols and norms and, you know, and that is our roadmap actually. And everything we do, everything on the agenda has to have a certain place in it. And I like that we have that. Before, I don't think there was that close watch or carefully to follow policy or, you know, what the agenda says, and we have to vote, and if we lose the vote, we can't have it, and you know, that's it.
Yeah, and that is key. You put so much out there, and that is so true. Policy drives. I mean, that's how it's like the law of the land. Policy drives the district, helps the superintendent know what the board expects, and then sharing it with their staff. That's the process. And there's no need for any individual board member to come in and say, no, we're going in the wrong direction. Let's go. Well, our business is educating children. So what do you mean we're going in the wrong direction? And there could just be different areas you want to focus on to improve, and that's what you decide what our buckets that we focus on, and allow the superintendent to deal with the educational landscape, everything else that's going on, that's what she's taking care of there. So thank you for that. John, what about you?
Oh, I was the first one to write, I said.
You're 7, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, you were first.
It's me.
It's you, that's
So
what.
the only thing I'll add, I also chose number 9, it's
Number
about
9.
the legacy. And it's how, thinking about it through the lens of how we act, what we say,
Mhm.
how we govern, how we talk to people, treat
Mhm.
people, vote on items, really speaks to who we are and what we stand for, going to number 7 and thinking about what would you want people to say about this governing board when you're no longer here,
Yeah,
right?
I
And
love
thinking
that.
about that ahead of time and then thinking, do we live in this manner as a board governance team? And if not, why not?
Why
And then what do we need to do to try to live that so that we can feel proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when you have your wins and be able to share with the community, so that no one else is telling your story. You don't ever want someone to be able to tell the story where it's just not correct.
Yeah.
Sometimes stories, if they're a little embellished, people are more interested in it. But well, let me tell you the truth. We're gonna learn to appreciate truth, and so yes, you are spot on with that, and making sure, because you're elected by the community, they trust you to represent the educational needs of the community as a whole. And so your job, and I've said this before, the superintendent teaches up to you so that you can engage the community. So these are just some questions that, very purposeful, thinking about that mindset. And you said it twice already, and I'm going to, when you mentioned about if there's a vote, and connecting that to, well, we may have, I say spirited discussion, which is okay. And whether if it's a 3-2 and you're on the side of the 2, and we agree to disagree because we say those things, but how are you demonstrating that? Because once the gavel is hit, it is now the will of the board, and then you act accordingly. So when you come to the next board member, there's no need to bring up, well, the last board meeting, and I always say to board, who's you guys? You're the board. That decision belongs to you. And so just remembering that, whether what side is it's the will of the board and I need to act accordingly. I will never say, well, I'm not going along, I'm not reading that packet because of that information, because I didn't vote for it. It is yours. It's yours. What are you thinking, John? Because you did this. What do you think? What's on your mind, John?
This is kind of like, we were talking about legacies a little bit earlier, it's like, I'm thinking like, what do I want the legacy to be? And I do want it to be, I'm gonna relate back to number 7. Well, this board stood for this, and this board stood for that, and, if we're successful, and standing for the right things, the legacy will build itself.
Yes.
And, as long as we, don't muck things up too much, we'll be okay.
And if you think about, if you guys had an opportunity, and I don't know when we walked in, it's usually like pictures of the Board of Education. If there was it's in the front, so we came in this way. So if there was a little plaque there, a statement that you had to make, that was your, like, what would that say? So, that people was like, yeah, that team did this. So, you just kind of think of these things so that as you're doing the work, every time you make a decision where you can find yourself like getting a little bit off of like, we have to stay focused because this is about the big picture. So that's just a way of, and you guys give each other permission to kind of pull your coattail like, come back this way, or remember what we said. It's all in the language that you use, what we said, because it's a collective body. So it's just a reminder. Yep, go ahead, go ahead.
So a cohesive team is so important.
There you go.
So the reason I'm saying that is when the board and superintendent or chancellor doesn't get along with, or they have conflict, it does impact. Even though people feel like, oh, they are far away. No, it does impact the morale of the organization. And not only just the community, but the organization, it's going to impact and then trickle down to schools.
Absolutely.
Even though people feel like, oh, that's far away, whatever they are talking about doesn't matter, but you can feel the conflict around them. That's really, we don't want to go down.
No. And I think many boards can always reflect back like, oh, we don't want to repeat that again. You know, and I always like to use the analogy of when you're in a car, you're looking forward. It's a reason that the windshield is so big compared to that rearview mirror. It's a reason for that. And I always ask board members, if you think you can go 40 miles an hour only looking in your rearview mirror, try it, but do it in an open field
Yeah.
where you can't run into anybody. But it's a reason why that windshield, the possibilities, the potential, but we can find ourselves reflecting too much, looking too much in that rearview mirror. We have to remember it's a glass back, like, yep, we left some carnage back there, yep, we made some wrong turns there, we gotta bulldoze this through as a reminder. But you always look in the big picture, the windshield is the opportunity that's connecting with your legacy, what you have the capabilities of doing all for the children. And like you said, Trustee Shay, is that, you know, does it impact into the classroom? Absolutely, because you're the leadership. And so how can you give any directive or instruction to your superintendent to do this and you guys are not modeling it? And so you can have all the best sayings on the wall about, we're excellent, we're this, and they look at the board meeting like, really? You guys don't like each other. You know, and if they come back with that, then that's when you have to really reflect on what are we doing? And then kids are watching you. You know, we know that, you know, you can Google boards gone wild and you can see all kind of behavior of boards that just have lost their way, you know. And so this is just a quick overview too of get some popcorn. Really, there is really Google boards gone wild when you have absolutely nothing else to do. The core, again, the core understanding of the basic principles. We went through that systems thinking. You know, it's creating systems change to reconstruct education system into something more effective. Systems thinking, big picture, that strategic focus, you know, knowing that the governance is a strategic job, right? So you have strategic focus, superintendent has strategic planning and her staff, right? So the board looking at the big picture. That deep learning is that it requires deep understanding of all the issues. So reading your packets, doing more information, digging, getting more information, but being knowledgeable so that you can make the most informed decision. And then manner. This one seems, you know, rules of civility. We know over the last 2 years that have been thrown out the window in so many districts. Civility coming from boards and coming from, you know, community. And we just have to get back to, we really can disagree, but we have to be professional about this. No one has a right to, you know, be condescending, all of that. So it's the manner in which the team operates. These are your core, your basic governance principles. So we had talked about, remember your superintendent was in the hot seat and all that? But she's a purposeful superintendent, so she knows how to really engage the board, and you guys have a great team, being very thoughtful, very purposeful for everything, and that's what you guys pretty much said, yep, that is what she's very purposeful. So, getting to our chapters here. So chapter 4, on the welcoming the new trustee, what the board should do and what the new trustee should do, okay? So look at this, pay attention to this table up here. You guys ready? I just love it. I just love it. I just love it. Look at
Got the
that.
better picture of that.
See? I'll put it off your website. So you think about help new board members feel welcome. So you guys think about, did you guys do this?
I did.
Okay. Set up meetings with the superintendent and find out the goals, the priorities. Individual board members should reach out with a note or a phone call. You know, we had COVID and all of that.
I still need to call me that much less.
You're a little bit behind.
I think I did call that.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Oh, except you.
Okay, see? Okay, get your calendars and make sure you give her a call, okay? So you think about that when you were able to go through schools. Of course, board members need to be in the schools, but there's protocol and how you go about visiting schools, right? What's your policy say about that? You think about arrange an in-depth discussion, meeting with the full board, you know, giving new trustees the opportunity to comment on your core beliefs. All of that is so important, so important. So Shay, what do you think about this one?
I'm so lucky,
It's sort of
to be
all over
the
now.
new board member, and with this great team, all of them reach out to me. And even though John doesn't, but in the meeting.
That's twice.
I try to be very, he is so kind. And then Dr. Moore, we set a meeting with me and then teaching me, guide me all the material need to be read and then explain to me. So we spent many hours of her precious time to guide me. And then at the beginning, I was so into, because my job is research and then on the analytical part. So I'm so into the how, which Dr. Moore taught me so much. So I started to lift myself, do the helicopter, don't do the under the line. And so I learned so much by that, and then with all the training, I observed everyone's behavior and then way talk and all that. So I started to apply what Dr. Moore taught me to the real work, which is super helpful. And the district is so kind to provide all the professional development, the governance course. That took me a long time, and a lot of investment on that, and then a lot of study, and that was super helpful. And then I can still remember our conversation. I can remember from which chapter finance on the leadership or achievement. So that helped me to speed up my adaptation time. And so I feel now I have a little bit of handle it and not go into the detail, not always suggesting how, instead of focus on the what or the why. So I try.
Absolutely. So if you have a chance to just reflect, I'm talking about the veterans here, what would you do differently for a new board member? What do you think? Did you have a moment where it probably would have been helpful if we would have done, like in your handbook, did your handbook talk about onboarding?
Yeah.
It does?
Well, we have two.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just
Okay.
jumped in.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Okay, so we have a board governance handbook that we collectively look at every single year and update. And actually, when Vice President Richardson was a new board member, she gave a lot of feedback about, I'm a new board member, this would have been helpful. As a result, I'm very proud. We should be very proud, because you were the one who kept saying, we need to have this. We built a new board member that's the governance handbook, but we built a new board member orientation, and it's this very thick from probably too much you don't wanna know, right? But it was from, when you come in, this is what you should expect, you're gonna have to fill out this paperwork, and you're gonna go to payroll, and then you gotta get an email. I mean, literally, and it was because of her feedback that said, this would be really good for me coming in, I knew, and so we heard that feedback and then put together this really robust onboarding training manual, essentially for new board members. And so Dr. Shea had the good fortune of, we went through our board governance handbook, but then we also were like, here's an electronic version of this, and let's look at certain chapters that'll help. And it just talked about the board meeting and how that's gonna function and what is an action item versus a consent item. And I think that was it's a really good, the Bible, right, for when you have someone new. And I was fortunate that I got to go through that with her, but the board has it, so anybody could have said, hey, do you want to go to coffee and like talk about this orientation book?
Yeah, and it's good to have it to refer back, almost going back to what you said, Mean, about there's a script. If I don't know something, I have something to go to, because just because you're a new board member, you come in and you have to do your board meeting.
Yeah.
The business doesn't slow down for you to catch up on your reading. And sometimes the community expects you to know everything that's going on at your first meeting. You know, and think about when some new board members get on their first job, which is the most important one, is to hire a superintendent. They have no knowledge of that. So it's good to have a tool that onboarding is so important, and try to get them up to speed as quickly as possible. But you still have to handle the business, right? So any other thoughts of something that you would do?
One thing I consider is having like a fact sheet for other board members for prospective before they even get elected to the board, but for prospective people who are running, just kind of tell you what the job entails. I mean, something a little more high level than like the full package that we've given them. But you know, I don't want anyone coming in surprised by the fact that this is basically a job. You have to put in a lot of hours, and because when you're in the public, sometimes you think, oh, they meet twice a month for 3 hours, and
That's it.
and that's it. That's not it, obviously. You know, so you know, so that might be helpful. And I think it's been a little hard in the past because we used to have like these, you know, we'd have 3 seats up for election, and you're all running against each other. So you might be reluctant to talk to some of the other people that are already on the board. But you know, now that we're into by just elections by trustee boards, basically, you know, that we might be able to people might be a little more confident about saying, oh, well, Trustee Murray, I'm running for school board, can you tell me your experiences? As opposed to when I was running against Trustee Murray, you know, so.
And then
Don't you do that? You meet with all of the prospective, all the candidates and you give kind of an overview of what
We get
to
the board
expect.
bylaws, we talk about the board, like the homework that has to happen, they give each of them a folder.
you talk to the candidates.
They
You
do. It's as part of
That is awesome. That doesn't happen. No.
It's part of our, remember the calendar we did like a new, when someone's thinking of running, and so that was the first thing, so I invited all of them to a one-on-one meeting. I think this is when Vice President Richardson was running, so I met with 3 or 4
Yeah, but
of the
there were 3 or
candidates.
4, but there were
Before
8
that,
people
because-
running.
But I invited all of them, some got back to me
Oh, no,
and
but
some didn't, and so then it was, okay, well then the ones who were interested, then let me walk you through, so I have folders for all of them, they just, not all of them came.
Because there are no requirements.
Right,
They don't have to know anything.
Uh-huh.
Usually 18 years of age and top enough to be elected. I always thought that candidates should have more knowledge about what they're getting into.
Yeah.
I've always thought that even when I was at the state level, the association, but our members said, don't you train people to run against me. That's how the mindset was. So I said, well, where do they go pick up a packet? Where do they register, you know, to say that where do they, give them a packet, almost like that, they need information so that it's not just 1 meeting a month or 2 meetings, so much more.
Yeah.
Because it will, I think, curtail a lot of individuals getting on thinking that they can come in and do so much as one person. So then you have to work through that and all that, so yeah.
Well, you did it when I was running, so that long as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's excellent.
because the board bylaws really outline like what you are one of 5, like, and so there were certain things really emphasized, and some were like, this is so helpful. Thank you for, you know, walking me through
Yeah.
these, because you don't know
You don't
until
know.
you get into it.
Because it looks so different on the other side of the table, so
2016.
absolutely. Anyone else, any thoughts?
I try to meet with candidates and new board members, have coffee and talk. And sometimes I bring my board handbook and I bring past agendas and packets and, you know, this is what you need to do, you know, just to prepare people for,
Absolutely.
you know.
That's awesome, I'm glad to hear that, That doesn't happen, because it's not required,
Right.
it's not required.
And Pat was so kind to call me and tell me, you are new, you don't have to say anything, no pressure. And that was so nice.
No.
Because you got the pressure, like everyone is talking and then I have nothing to contribute. And I said, no worry, when I was new, I don't say much. So it's okay, you take your time to learn. I remember one of the paragraphs say, time is on your side, there's nothing to rush. Just learn and then do the right thing. So I really appreciate what Pat.
Well, and I was thinking about that, because when I read it in the book, I was like, oh, they said that.
Right there. Absolutely, you think about the first 100 days, you know, you suspend all your preconceived notions about it, you just come in and you should be like a sponge. You listen more than you talk, even though, like I said, if you have to come in and be involved in either closing a school or something major, you have to just read up as much as you can, but then you just have to get to a point where this is enough, I have to make my best informed decision based upon what I have.
Yeah.
I can't go by anything else, this is all I have. So, as a new board member, you think about this, Trustee Shay, about get up to speed in a reasonable time, but understand that, like you said, time is your best friend, right? Accept the realities of what governance is, that framework, that the script, if you will. Be mindful of confidentiality. Those are special, those relationships with organizations, and I believe every board member, you have to write the ethical conflict of interest.
Form 700.
Yep, every year, because things can change, and so you just have to be mindful that you may have been involved in other groups, but now that being a school board member, it may be perceived differently, so you have to kind of just think about that. So yeah, it can look different as a governing body, right? So anything else in chapter 4 that really resonated with you that you'd like to share? Did you agree with what they were saying about for new trustees? You kind of put some of these in and maybe some of these are in your handbook?
I like the where it brought up unified board, not a lockstep.
Yeah.
You can be divergent, as long as you really want to all go to the same big picture place. Suspend all preconceived notions about the district staff and board, because you will learn the true picture as you go along.
Mm-hmm.
I think what stood out for me on page 77 at the top, that, when you're meeting, it's important that the board not use this time to lecture the new trustee or in any way attempt to pressure him or her into falling in line, right? And I think that's really important, especially if there's a fractured board. People are like, let me get to the
Which side am I gonna be on? Yeah. Putting that pressure, absolutely. And really, everyone has a voice, everyone has a vote, right? So no big eyes or little U's. Yes, the structure is that you have a president, a vice president, all that's the structure. But the president's vote is no more important than a trustee. All of you guys are leaders. Everyone's sitting in the seat. It's just the structure, you need someone to be in that seat, kind of, be effective, running the meeting effectively and things of that nature, so.
I think I actually starred the 3 realities of governance. You are elected as an individual, but you must govern as a member of a team.
There you go.
And
Yep.
And number 3 was also started for me that your success as a trustee is dependent on the success of the whole.
Absolutely. And that really, makes you really think about, we are a team. And if my teammate is struggling in an area or doesn't understand something, it's my obligation to pause and bring them along. You don't want to just say, well, we're going forward and leave you behind. That's not what a team does. Because there are many reasons why, other than them being new and it's just so much information. But of course, being a new board member, I always say it's best to listen more than talk, because if you see something, a process, and then you want well, I think we should change this just because you're feeling it should be changed, but listen so you can understand why it's in place. Then you're like, aha, moments now, because based upon what we talked about last board meeting, now it makes sense. And that's what you do, and that's how you help bring everyone along.
Sure.
Absolutely.
I think it's important too, and this is not necessarily just new member, but I think in general, and this past couple of years, a perfect example is the emotional intelligence that is required, right, to do the work. And as a new member, right, like the emotions that come, you came right during kind of a heightened emotional time, I think, in education. But being really conscious of the emotional intelligence and like your own presence, and like Nina said, I have this book to calm you down, right? But we kind of chuckle, but that's a real thing. And so we never want to make decisions out of emotions. And who's the loudest voice, right?
Absolutely.
Because what happens is emotions do change, and you may have seen this, right? It was like, I saw one board, I was there one week, and we're there, public comment, and there's parents are upset about masks, right? The next week, same group of parents upset about masks, and then I come the following week, there's no one around. So if the board rushed to make a decision about that energy in the room, right, and not having the emotional intelligence around all that was required, as you all know, to make a decision about dropping masks, because there's loudness in the room, then that in itself can be really problematic, especially when we talk about equity, right? And so I wanted to bring that up because I think as new members, you can be very susceptible to that, without having what Nina said, I need to calm myself down, even though it might just be hearing the energy or even the interaction that may happen amongst you as board members where you're passionate about something. So I think that's important, having the tools. You know, sometimes that's a whole training in itself is around emotional intelligence and being present in our own leadership and knowing our triggers and our buttons, right? And just so I wanted to say that because
Absolutely.
it's a big deal.
And that's why I'm really glad that the structure of public comment is the way it is, because it can be so emotional. If you start engaging back and forth, can you imagine? And there are some boards who do. And those are some board meetings that are 6 hours long, 6, 7, and whole agenda. But I'm so glad that that structure is there, but it's, again, you sharing with your community the structure. And if it's something that you guys determine is something that needs to have a comment, it's usually either by the board president or the superintendent. Make it very short. I will contact you one-on-one, and then keep it moving. But if you went, because of the emotions going back and forth, just even in the last 2 years, it would be.
Well, I think understanding that public comment is meant to inform our decisions, so, so that's part of what we take into account when we're making a decision.
Absolutely.
And
it's so important. It is so important because, again, you are elected by the community and you have to carve out space to hear them. It's just to make sure that you're very clear on, they know that you're just not just gonna be staring at them and won't respond, because sometimes that makes the community very frustrated but there hasn't been any front loading to let the community know that this is how, we operate, this is the protocol, we hear you, we just don't engage. And but we can continue to talk.
And that's sometimes hard because sometimes, it's one thing if someone's spouting at you and think their opinion's wrong, but sometimes they come with, with alternate facts, and you'd love to say, no, our budget is not composed of this, or something is not happening there, but at least, if it's not something on the agenda, you can't even address it. They can call you whatever they want, they can say whatever they want, you're like, thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're speaking on a specific topic on the agenda, you could say, well, I heard one speaker say this, but the reality is that. But for the most part, people are speaking during the general public comments. And you just have to sit there and take it. And that's kind of when sometimes my mind's like, stop, slow the wheels down, don't engage.
Breathe. But it's also an opportunity, like you said, that you hear them. So if it was something about the budget, and then you will get anxiously say, our next meeting, we're gonna talk about the budget, forget it, not directly to them, you're talking to each other. And we have a study session on this, because again, that's where we can find out more information. They're open to the public. So it's just a way to say, it is about the business, even though what they're saying is not correct, but there's gonna be an opportunity for them to learn more. Because you're just doing focusing on the business of the district. So yeah. So you feel good after reading chapter 4? Yes. Until John calls you.
That's 3.
All right. Coordinate, sync those calendars. Sync those calendars. So chapter 5, we were talking about governing with coherence, right? And so we talked a lot about framework. Governing with coherence, what did you pick up? What are they're talking about governing with coherence? In your reading, what did you walk away with when they're really focusing on coherence? Because there's different ways of understanding coherence, what we're used to based upon the way they're talking about it. What did you find interesting about coherence?
The two main things that help a board to be coherent is trust and collaboration. Trust being the main one, and I believe that to be so true. we have to build that trust and nurture it so that we can work well together and we can see the big picture.
Absolutely. And trust is so major because it's woven through everything you do. It takes time to build trust, but it can be destroyed just like that. And so that's where you have to be very intentional, speaking your truth, and whether you're on the opposite end of the spectrum, if someone sees that you are being truthful and that, it's just your lived experience, your perspective, I shouldn't be angry with you. And how you engage with me in a very respectful way, all those things, if they're done not in the most positive way, can start destroying trust. And there's no way that a board can work cohesively together if no one trusts each other. And that will impact your superintendent.
And
Absolutely.
I think one of the sentences struck me the most is because we have to vote, right? So we have to agree on the disagree. So agreement in my mind originally is always the most important, but it's not. Here it says trust is about respect and understanding, not about agreement. I'm on page 93 on the bottom. So it's respect and understanding each other. And it's okay we disagree with each other, but we respect and understand each other.
Absolutely.
So that is like, wow, aha moment to me. So I can disagree with Nina, but I respect her. And I'm just using as an example. I disagree with her.
He's like, yes.
But I respect and I listen to her point. But at the end, if I still disagree, it's okay, or you guys can disagree with me. So I think that is really important to me.
There's a sentence in here relating to that. Alignment is rational, coherence is emotional.
There you go. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, because I mean, I could, when me and Dr. Shea are on opposite sides of the issue, it's like, that's rational. We can have decisions, but the emotional thing is, I still have to put my trust in her. I have to put my trust in all my colleagues. And when if it doesn't exist in people's hearts, it doesn't exist at all.
Right.
Yeah, I have those underlined.
Yeah.
I have everything highlighted, but I have the important things underlined. That was one of them.
One of the things that I appreciated in reading this, I'm at the bottom of 89 into 90, where it talks about what coherence is not. So it's not required that individual schools give up their autonomy. And so I think, obviously, when I think of coherence and alignment around the work that we're doing from the boardroom to the classroom, and it says, instead, coherence provides guidance for how sites can be responsive to local conditions in a way that's consistent with school district priorities for achieving gain. So I started thinking, how would I be able to demonstrate that? And so one of the things that I hope that the board can see is that every time a principal gets up and presents, right, they have to align to the goals and the priorities, what they're doing. It's not identical, right, between elementary, middle, and high, but they're very good at showing, in our context, these are the strategies that we're employing, this is the curriculum that we're using, these are the ways that we're intervening on behalf of kids to see, wow, we really are focusing on academic excellence, like the priorities and the goals of the district. And so I thought, I think it's an important point in terms of thinking this way, that it doesn't have to be rote and identical the exact same way. Again, I'm thinking through the lens of curriculum and instruction.
Right.
But that you should be able to see that through line from every principal's presentation, every campus, even though it might look different. But still a focus on what you're doing on behalf of kids that align to the goals and the priorities.
And I really applaud Dr. Moore of that structure. She is not only guiding us on those 4 buckets, right? Those 4, not this, but
Those, the other buckets, 4 buckets.
Those 4 instruction and then human resource, those 4. And then how she ask schools to align with the CCAP, not only the district goal, the CCAP goal, and then their own goal. So you can see the alignment, not only the horizontal, but vertical. That's the part. Every time when you see the presentation from the school, always have that threads in there. You can see it really clearly. So thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely.
It talked, Going toward the upper right quadrant there, the cultivated collaborative cultures, there's and actually lower left too. There's talk about, micromanagement or accountability here. It's like, I have a perspective in that I am a staff member at a government organization that has a similar structure. It's got a board, in that case, my case, it's a commission and an executive director. And, if one of the commissioners in my case said, hey, John, can you do this? One, I'd be like, well, is that what we're supposed to be doing, or is that your personal request? But on the second hand, me being in that staff issue where a directive, there's an issue and I have to solve it, I have to sometimes make sure that I'm not coming here saying, this is how I would do this, and this, because that starts getting into the micromanagement and the how, and coming from that staff perspective where, when there is a problem, I'll solve it, and maybe it's just me being I've had to learn to say when someone asks you for something, they're not necessarily asking you
To solve the problem.
to solve the problem. They're
They just
asking
wanna
you
ask you.
for your, for your support, and that's what I'm trying to do here, be someone who's supportive and not saying, well, hey, Shantana, this is how we'll fix that problem for our people, or setting up this program.
I love that you share that. This is a prime example of what we do away from the board. And then how do I separate that when I come? Because we're problem solvers. We take care of either in our home or on our day job. But then you come here, you don't have to do it. You just have to know that it needs to get done.
Right.
And how do you kind of step back? That's why training, governance, understanding the parameters in which you govern, it's not about, yes, you're probably very capable because you handle things outside of being at the board table, but the structure is not set up that way. So how do you complement, be able to put things on the table as a suggestion, everybody, and then you kind of marinate that together, say, out of all of that, what's best for our students? And then the education expert being able to say, yay or nay, yeah, we can do it because we have this in place, or, we can't do that yet because we need these things in place. And that's where that collaborative relationship really makes sense.
Yeah, and I also on the one hand, it's hard, I have to check myself sometimes to not offer direct courses of action. On the other hand, my perspective as a staff for an agency lets me know that, Dr. Spalding is doing exactly what I would do. I can see how Keith Irish is taking our assistant superintendent is taking these steps that the board laid out and implementing them. Mm-hmm. So it does give me a little bit of faith in that regard because I can see how it's done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, before, and superintendent, you kind of touched this a little bit when you talked about on page 90. But what about on page 91? You see the coherence at the bottom of 5.2. And what if you're only operating right there? 5.2 diagram, and you look at 5.3. You see the difference there? What was it saying about that?
It is putting us in the dark.
If you're on, you'll stay in the dark if you're 5.2, right?
So I'm looking at the governance style.
Yep, there you go. The type. So the governance team must have the intersected in there as well of understanding. That's that joint mindset. Are there some districts that operate like 5.2? Absolutely. If the board is not paying attention to what they need to do, their role and making sure that they understand, you're not trying to micromanage, but you have to be included in that diagram at 5.3. What would you say to that?
No, absolutely. I think when you think of governance team, the superintendent is part of the team. So you don't keep the team in the dark about what the day-to-day, the business that's happening and what is going on. And so I see this whole, that Venn diagram, right, where they cross over so that there is knowledge. Across, again, I see everything from through lines, right? Yeah, from the boardroom to the classroom. Yeah. That there's this kind of interdependency.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we talk about the 10,000 foot view, how are you looking at the big boulder if you don't understand what's going on. You need to know just enough so that you can make your informed decision. You don't have to be an expert, you don't have to have a CPA to be able to understand the budget, but you better know just enough because you don't create the budget, but you have to approve it. So you need to know, you don't need to know where you purchase mulch from to beautify, you just need to know, we beautify our campuses, so is there a budget line item to do that across the board? That's all you need to know. So that's how you have to start looking at it, but, cause budgets can be, for school districts can be so overwhelming. Unless you've been blessed enough to have a multi-million-dollar home that, you know, your budget, your personal budget is like that, some people do. But does that equate to doing the business of the district?
Oh,
It's not time yet, but
You need a break?
Well, normally during the meeting, we have a captioner and we have to take a break every 90 minutes, and we're not quite there yet, but I just wanna know if we're gonna need to do it tonight.
Yeah, we can take a 5-minute stretch break.
Well, that's fine.
You tell me when you want to take it.
It would still be a few minutes. Well, maybe we should just go ahead and, can we get, about 10 minutes?
Absolutely, because this is perfect for this. Because, your assignment, and I'm going to divide you up in teams. And guess who's team 1 is going to be John and Lexi. So you have to go over here. You're gonna be, did you hear me, John? Your
I'm gonna
team,
be with,
yes. You're gonna be team 1, okay? Cultivating collaborative culture will be, Patricia and Amina, and then you and I will do accountability. So what I want you to do is look in your big book on page 43. And it's just a matter of understanding those components of the coherence framework. So that's just where it starts talking about, but it's actually on 45. But look at in your book on page 45, you like the focusing direction. I just want you to answer the one question across, or outline the ways of the board for the board to develop a shared governance mindset. Just kind of chat with each other. You guys will have cultivating, collaborative. Just think about a way that the board can develop a shared governance. So just kind of talk with each other, jot down some notes, and then we'll report out, okay? And then you and I will do securing accountability.
this one, number 4.
Oh, yeah.
But we're going
Look for
to,
similarity.
You guys just talk about it right now, and after the break, we will
we're
report
gonna take a
out.
break now.
Oh, okay.
No, you want the break
Yeah,
now?
that's what I'm saying.
No,
No,
10
no,
minutes,
he wasn't.
right?
She said 10 minutes.
No, he said 10 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's why I said I'm gonna go ahead. No, that's why I said, no, you guys can talk for 10 minutes.
Yeah, do it now. Oh, all right.
I'm just.
Versus number 4, right?
Yes.
Look for similarities and.
Oh,
this
thanks
is
for
what
having
I
a
said.
minute break.
Oh.
We're not having a break.
Bring us back live.
Yeah.
No, because he said 10 minutes.
Dowdy,
What did I do? Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, so. Let's kind of chat about
Summarize the key points,
securing
shared responsibility.
accountability.
For
What did
similarities
you?
and differences on that.
I appreciate that.
So probably 4 and 5.
You need to.
So we're cultivating.
You need to ask questions.
So we can
About how you're
evaluate that corner.
We need to evaluate
And we'll do
programs to see if
those
they're
for that
having an
corner.
impact on students
Collaborative.
or not.
So I think,
And part of that is looking at it from a systemic lens.
so.
And so I
For the
put,
PID
my main
deals,
thing that I wrote down initially was micromanagement is not the way to provide support or build
the 4
trust.
components of the
And that
coherence model.
usually
Okay,
there
so
is a lack of structure, organization, or governance discipline. So to secure accountability, you wanna be able to build those things. What are the structures, what are the protocols, what are our governance principles, do we have norms? And part of that is you trust the questions, right, around, when we show our data, it goes that we are serving as some student disability.
Cultivating collaborative.
Yeah, it's just, it's not good, so,
But you have to address it.
Yeah, but we're honest about it, and we're transparent about it. And asking questions like, well, what are some of the ways in which you guys are working, or our team is working on this? Or even asking us when we say, we're doing fine, right? Okay, so how have we disaggregated to be able to see which students are doing fine and which students are not? Are there metrics? Are there? And so I think getting us to a place of that securing accountability is making it okay for us to have questions like that, to not feel like you don't trust me, right, versus here, I'm gonna sit with you, I'm gonna walk you through what I want you to do, how I want you to do it, when I want you to do it, right?
Okay,
So I took some minutes around that.
What are we gonna put in there? Look for
So
similar.
a lot of it really, I thought, talked to a good amount about,
The learning.
talk about, how
Well,
to, if you're advocating for certain
my
programs
difference,
or
just
in any
anybody
broad,
is
being
that I ask
strategic,
a lot of
being,
questions.
focusing on, when you say earlier, the
That's
more
what I
strategic
said,
focus or strategic
collaborative
agenda.
culture. So I ask a lot of
And if
questions
you are
because I wanna
governance
know what's.
focused, right, you're
I wanna
going
know
to
a little more,
be mindful of
and I feel
the
like
health
I
of
need
the
more
organization.
information.
Yes.
And being
Probably
able
the average
to ask questions that will hold us accountable to
So the
their
staff will know what your work.
And if we're not,
So
we're gonna talk about what else is not.
Yes, I think that's really important.
The importance
It's
of
important for allocation of
creating
resources. Yeah, so they don't get that data, and they don't know, right, then how can they direct us to utilize resources as efficiently as possible for kids,
This is what.
right?
We're just
So this is a good one, I
Yeah,
guess
this
some of
one-
it resonated.
Good,
What
good.
did you?
And then in your, cause you work closely with the board, and then how do you take that information and help staff understand that, you know, we have to focus on that accountability, securing that, what do we need to do? The board is paying attention up here, what do we need to do? And then of course, we're gonna look for guidance from you,
Yeah.
you know, so I'm sure you already do this, so how does your staff respond? You know,
So we implemented a few years back a performance management, and part of that is you're monitoring all the programs and things that you're implementing, and so I shared some of our district level board presentations to just that. So
Yes.
board social code, regulation, here are the goals, here are the actions, here's where we are. So they might see a lot of red, and then I get to say, you're seeing a lot of red, we're gonna bring you guys a range, like you're at 0 to 50% being
I don't know,
unconscious.
maybe not. Because I feel that when we
If
get
we're
our
at
agenda,
like 60
and I
to
read
79%.
I think that,
We've
they're
made some progress, we haven't hit it,
collaborating
we're obviously
with us
in that
to
last
get
10%
us
tier.
into,
And so,
you know,
we use
give
that
them
as a
more.
way for us
So it's
to
asking about
monitor and measure the impact. We haven't gotten so good at
It
measuring.
doesn't just happen.
the goal is
Monitoring whether or not it's
drivers
happening has been a way for us to build an accountability. A few years ago, the board said, we feel like we want more data.
The nice
Which is
part
great,
about it.
so now we shifted all of our presentations and we're all focused on it, so,
we're gonna talk about that data.
I hope we do.
We are.
Because we're trying to shift,
Okay, so it says.
but I hope, I'm glad we'll talk about this. I'm
So
trying
I'm
to
gonna
shift
say,
us so
you
that
set and measure
we talk
goals,
less
you staff
about
know what to work for,
Collaborative
you
work
identify
the things that
Developing
aren't
people,
impactful to students. I want to
design
shift
the
our resource
organization,
focus on student learning and achievement and
in a
outcome.
way
New
that
ways of
provides
working
support
together.
to allow every level
There's
to
this
focus
kind
on
of
recommendations.
pull because it's like, okay, but as we're shifting, so questions are trying to get more, we're getting more
Good
data.
work. I'm sorry, I
But we
really
have kind of a
good.
Right?
always come back to this, because you do a
Well,
wonderful job, I can do this
but
for my.
sometimes we need longer for
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
yeah, because we want to provide,
Yeah.
like, this is what you have asked us to do. So we wanna talk to you about our successes and our challenges.
And I think of this
Talk
one,
to you a little bit.
so this is
Tired
the
commitment.
commitment.
Right,
I don't wanna
So
put
it just has to be very succinct that the board can understand it.
That's
Yeah, whether it takes 15 minutes, but as long as it's not a lot of the other stuff that's important. But that can be added, you can read that later, it can be supporting that.
Yes, yes.
So it's just getting them to say, okay, it's a lot that they need to know, so
All the
if it took 20 minutes,
characteristics
but if
of
it's
our-
good
so-
stuff. Cause when we heard a data presentation last night, that book, those books.
Trust
Was it
is
amazing?
the-
It was over an hour, wasn't it?
And
And I have.
Did everyone stay engaged?
Collaboration.
Actually, it was, you know, it would normally be like that.
Collaboration.
Isn't that something?
The research.
Yeah.
So they actually work with or
Okay,
something.
so,
Qualitative, which is something.
so there's a lot to unpack here.
So
They
students
had been working.
success.
So this was a
teacher's teach.
So when people trust each other, they can be much more adaptable and open to all forms of pluralism. When people trust each other, they can think long term. So, when there's trust in the room, people are more inclined to collaborate and experiment, to open themselves to others, to new ideas, and to novel approaches, and to extending.
We're very efficient.
Trust, environment, work, effort. So there's a lot of stuff here. Most people begin with trust, to trust someone they feel when they feel listened to. I think we already do this. Understood.
Support where we're at. The courses is
Someone's benefit.
Which courses in person, is it spread out? Is it all beginning courses are in person?
depending on the discipline. So if
Oh, yeah, I remember, I love this too, because John McCain,
Oh, what page is that?
remember he said that he could be friends. He
What kind of
just
questions?
agreed on most issues.
Keep them up here. And the staff really appreciate it, like, they must have.
You and me.
But they still want to.
Yeah.
So
Support.
some of these courses, they are so called in person. To the interdisciplinary course.
Classy.
But with that, right?
So,
This is what I really enjoy about government. The fact that, you know,
And helping them,
somehow
create their
found a way.
keep that, the superintendent was able to answer my, he says, you know, what I would say is, my staff person just worked on that yesterday, and they were like,
So
see that being role playing.
respect that person's position
Well, I mean, it's like, they used to have, like, before the pandemic, they were.
and honor the letter and
And
spirit
people
of
that,
the
because they didn't
education.
have
And that's
much
really sometimes I have a problem with, because I feel that
You can stay local, pay your $49 units to thousands of dollars.
So, looks like everybody, you've written things down, we'll come back and share, you need your 10-minute stretch, or 5 minute? You want 10, you have to take 10, 10-minute stretch, great.
No. Recess the 10 minutes.
Okay, she's
I don't know, no, she didn't write it down. I don't even know.
10-minute, yeah, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You guys seem like you've already written
is
down,
it off?
so
Okay.
10 minutes, yeah. We'll just report
Gabby,
out.
can you mute
Back in session.
We are back in session.
Okay, so that was a well-deserved little stretch break there. So each group, you had your assignment and you had some great discussion about focusing on direction, cultivating collaborative culture, and then securing accountability. So if team one could report out, and we were just going to talk about, outline ways for the board to develop a shared governance mindset, because this is what this is all about, based upon focusing on direction. So, Pat and Mina, what did you come up with?
So,
Are we team one?
Focus.
are you seeing?
Wait a minute, who's team one? I'm sorry.
Me,
I'm sorry, team one, focusing on direction. I'm sorry, team one, I should just say. I forgot I did that intentionally because I wanted to make sure you. Team one, go
Just make sure I
ahead.
called her, right?
Yeah.
We've said a way to do this is to set and measure goals so that staff will know what to work toward. And you do that by developing the people and designing the organization in a way that provides support, which allows every level to focus on implementation.
Any thoughts, your other team, that you have anything else you wanna add?
I can add on that, that was, this is additional extra information. Dr. Moore trained us on the study session for the setting of the district priorities. And that's how she has a PowerPoint, and then that's how we see this fit in beautifully. That set direction, develop people, as John mentioned, design the organization and provide sufficient support. And then this is all aligned from the district priority to superintendent's goal, to cabinet, to division, to principal, to classroom. So it's all connected.
Connected, absolutely. Any thoughts, what your colleagues shared? Superintendent.
Revisiting the goals every year as we do, I think is important. And we get reminders, that at every single meeting, the schools say what their focus is and actually it comes from our goals, and so.
Okay, team two, cultivating collaborative culture.
So what we wrote down was deep collaborative work requires new ways of working together. Trust, shared leadership, sustained focus, and inquiry, collaborative inquiry. And what I liked was there was a saying, collaboration moves at the speed of trust. So trust is, of all of those, trust is the most important thing. And so one of the things, trust is when members of a board have faith that the motivation and inherent beliefs of their colleagues and team are honorable, ethical, and honest. We're all here for a moral imperative, and so we have to trust, as Dr. Moore says, assume positive intent. We have to trust that we're here for the same reason and for the right reason. And so cultivating collaborative culture would entail trust. I kind of think that we're in a good place there. Trust that the others come from a good place, positive intent, treat others respectfully, and then we do our board workshops. And so if there's any baggage left over at the end of the day, it comes up at every 6 months when we have our workshops. And the main thing is if we can, I think one of the things that I read is that if we can trust our colleagues, then we can set long-term goals. We know that it's just not going to be, one and done, and we'll forget about it the next day. So I agree with the book that trust is the main thing for cultivating a collaborative culture.
And building, creating the culture takes time.
Oh, yeah.
Again, shoring it up. putting all the ingredients in to make sure that that culture, the climate that you're trying to create, number one, will be sustainable. It's like you said, it's not a one and done, just do it, we've arrived, we've done it, it's never that easy, we wish. Any comments from your colleagues on the collaborative, cultivating collaborative cultures, any Sure.
The focus, the direction that we forgot to mention, it's those four, teaching and learning,
Mhm.
human resources, school climate, safety, and budget. Those are our four very focused direction, and that's how we are able to align those four direction with, that the school can align that to them.
Absolutely.
And then that's also superintendent's goal, it's tied to this as well, so everything is coherent.
Coherent, and then you're consistent, so it's not like, oh, we've never seen that before. It all, on your agenda items should align with what your, either the LCAT or your strategic plan or your priorities. Why is it on the agenda? If yes, we know there are things that are on the agenda that you have to talk about every year that really, like where it's hodgepodge, we gotta put it on there. But the majority of what you're talking about, teaching and learning and outcomes for your students, how does that align with your priorities? And the presentations, how do they align with that? The questions that the board asks, how does that align with what we say we're going to be doing over time? Absolutely. So Superintendent, what say you about security and accountability? You had a lot there.
I did, but I'll keep it concise. So we talked about the importance of providing data and monitoring progress and bringing that data, sharing that data with the board in a transparent way. And about holding ourselves accountable to this is where we're trying to go and this is where we are, even if where we're trying to go and where we currently are far apart. We think of our PM, our red, yellow, green, right? You guys have seen presentations where we're showing we're not quite there yet. And then we've seen some green and lots of yellows, which I think is good to just show. So it's about a healthy accountability. And then asking key questions to make sure that we're clear on how our students are progressing and then which students are progressing and which ones aren't. And then I wrote here, keep a strategic focus on the goals and the priorities of the district and utilize data to help us determine and hold ourselves accountable for doing right by students.
Absolutely. Any comments?
I just, I couldn't be clear on our direction more this year than ever because we have so much meaningful data. We were given the school bus. And to me, then I see the grid and I see the, everything broken down. And it's like a very detailed account of how and what our principals are doing, our teachers are doing. I know I read something about Los Cerritos. This is one of our Title I schools. And I heard that when they were trying to intervene with the kids that couldn't read, they immediately changed courses and did something else to see if the kids could come along better. And I thought that was great. I don't know how long that's come along, but I know that our kids are being pushed in a different direction. And sometimes when I go into schools and visiting and just sitting there watching the kids, plus reading everything on the walls and everything, it's so much different for the kids. And that they're learning keyboarding in the 4th grade. I mean, I was in high school. I don't want to date myself, okay? But you couldn't get keyboarding until if you were going to be a secretary
Right.
in the day. And so we are so advanced now in our school district. Everyone is vested in just knowing our TOSAs, our English language, all of these specialists that we have. It's just amazing how focused they are with identifying and just being part of the evolution of these kids.
Right.
And I realize, I often say, well, how are they gonna teach these kids this? And somehow it happens in just the way education is today, because they use technology, they use strategies that are so interesting that, you know, I notice it because the girls in the high school are well spoken, they write well. I read whatever it is that they have up on the wall, and you know, we're doing something right when the kids, there's reports up on the wall and you read them, and it's just amazes me, all the learning that's going on, despite some of the things that we are told that, oh, the schools aren't performing. I beg to differ, you know, we get the toughest kids here. We don't have the luxury of not teaching, we have to teach everyone. You know, kids in gurneys and
However they show
all
up,
kinds of stuff.
and it's okay.
And it's
However they show
okay,
up,
but you know what,
absolutely.
and we got these kids that are mainstreaming, they used to call that mainstream, I don't know what they call it. They still call it, they got these kids and you know, the IEPs, you bring these children outside and they are, you go, oh my God, but they must be learning how to socialize. And this is what amazes me about our district, because everyone has a place, and everybody's performing, and everybody's presenting when we get the principles and things, all the data that we have. And I think that I never used to see it before, but I'm so happy to see it now. So, that is what is this organization to me is about. And I don't know, it's just where education has, you know, the evolution of education.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy to see it.
Absolutely. You know, when again, the history of public education and where we are today, but we still have to focus on our job is still to educate all children, regardless of all this other stuff. How do we make sure that their experience is the best that they can possibly have?
You know, today I saw our LBQT, whatever.
LGBTQ.
Well, you know, just maybe 10 years ago, maybe you wouldn't have seen these students out there. And they're so comfortable. This is the beauty of this.
Yeah.
Because these children were behind the curtain somewhere. You know, or they were in closed doors, they weren't in closets.
They weren't exposed, but they were
Now they
among
feel
us, absolutely.
confident to come through. And I think that's another major milestone in education today. It's exciting, really.
Yeah. And look what you have to look forward to, just making sure that all kids find a space that they fit in. They don't have to, you know, justify who they are, how they show up every day.
I'm glad you said that.
Absolutely.
Justify who
One
they
thing is they come to school to learn, and that's it, right? And so we had, and thank you guys for going through that exercise, really focusing on the coherence framework, you know, the deepening learning. Again, the responsibility of the board to really be engaged and understand all the elements, all the systems that are in place. And right in the middle was about leadership, working with your superintendent, all of you guys are working as a team. So we talked a little bit earlier about in chapter 6, it really went into about, you know, how do you operate as a governing team? You know, best practices, your principles, your protocols, and your norms. And you guys talked about your handbook. And so out of the reading, is there anything that really stood out for you? You know, you think about how you conduct, the manner in which does how you conduct your work matter for student achievement? And the research says, you know, that school boards in high achieving districts exhibit habits of certain characteristics, and we talked about that before. In most dramatic examples from research, scholars compare districts with similar levels of poverty and disadvantage to determine factors that separate high performing districts from those with low. And so again, the kids show up, you teach whoever it shows up, but again, how are you, the leadership, how are you engaging in? Because we're not gonna label children, you're free and reduced, you're high risk, you're that. No, you have to educate all children. But, you know, how does your conduct interfere with, if you're able to do that? Interfere with the superintendent and her team being able to do that. So just establishing those rules, that's what your protocols, your principles, how you're going to operate. So remember in your protocols, the board policies are the requirements that govern. We talked about it at the very beginning. You know, the scripting, the policies are there, that's what board's responsibility is. Hire your superintendent, set policy, and be good stewards of the budget. And all those other bullets in between, but those are the big boulders of what you're responsible for. So the protocols are operating rules that provide structure, and that's what you need, so that you can always get focused, you know, if you lose your way. So having those protocols. And go ahead, sure, go jump on in.
Sorry,
No.
I'm stuck on the 2 slides before.
Okay, no worries, no worries, no worries.
Sorry. So, yes.
That one,
this
there you go, you like that one, okay.
I'm wondering, I try to comprehend what does that mean? Does that mean if we are a high achieving board, does that mean that we will impact students become a highly achieving achievement? So is that what you try to say, or just we as a highly functional team will become a highly functional, highly achieving district? What does that highly achieving district, does that connect to student achievement or just how we conduct business? Does that have anything to relate to our student achievement? I hope so.
Right, and that's a great question, I'm looking at your colleagues.
Well, I mean, I can certainly see how, you know, if there's dysfunction on the board, how it's gonna trickle down and cause a low performance. But I also have to wonder sometimes, looking at this slide, if sometimes if there is low performance in a district, that leads to a dysfunctioning board, because we've talked about this, how we have so many different cooks, and we're all saying, well, I think we need to do this to solve the problem, I think we need to do that to solve the problem, et cetera, and it'll just kind of compound on itself and self-reinforce the problems.
But we don't really solve the problems, they do.
I know we don't, but I'm saying, like, in those districts,
And yes, research says, and this is from the Lighthouse study, if you Google that, it really, they did many years, and I think they're on their third research about that, when they talked about board behavior, does it impact the success of the district? Absolutely. And that's why also those 8 characteristics of an effective governance team, and we use that also for equity lens. If you have those characteristics, being data savvy, you know, being collaborative, good relationships with each other, supporting your superintendent, the chances are that you are on the right road of being an effective team, and then that does push down into that allows the superintendent to do her job at the highest level. But if the board is in disarray, the superintendent will spend more and more of her time engaging in that, managing. And if she's spending 30-40% in, you know, managing the board, then she's not doing all of her job that you hired her to do. So that is what the research says, exactly.
I'm gonna give a good example, and many examples, but when I think about low achievement, right, like think about what is the metric for achievement first, right? Test scores, right, and we think about all the things that fall in low achievement. And then you think about, like, typically looking at the data, history of public education is one, but that whole concept of predictability of success or failure, right, which is never the kids, right? The kids are brilliant. So we have to start there, the focus is on our brilliant kids. And not even a dysfunctional board, which is interesting that you mentioned that, because even the most functional boards, right, if you're looking at the data and kids aren't doing well, there's some illness in the system, right? So when I think about the concept of resources, because you have to be a fiscally responsible board. We in education, not this board, right, but in education have spent quadrillions, is that a word?
It is now.
Even though we are not ever adequately funded, right? But we've spent so much money on curriculum, right? Think about the 4 buckets right now: curriculum, professional learning, hiring people who may not even be here anymore, right? I say professional learning because a lot of times we do in 2 years, throw it out, do the next one. Like, think about it, and we don't stay the course on much in education. So now, as a fiscally sound board, right, go back to the characteristics that were mentioned, do we monitor our resources, right, and monitor the impact of our policies? And to be honest, like, even in the most functional space, right, we get along and it appears great, but when you look at the data, right, our kids aren't achieving because they're not brilliant, it's that we have systems in place that we have not interrupted. So without really thinking about that piece of, are we doing just the simple things that actually are really profound when we say, what's the impact of us spending those trillions of dollars, right, over years, whether we were here or not, by the way, right? But we're part of that system. So in the end, what are low achieving districts? Like, we gotta be real, right? They are typically the kids who have not been historically served well in the system. They're the kids who typically go back to the history of public education where it wasn't designed to support kids, right? Of all kind of walks of life. So when we talk about that, that's what's interesting. When you look now at the research of high achieving districts, what are those? Well, it's typically districts who have structures in place, right? Partnerships, like so many different things that even supplement like what we do, because we know we're never adequately funded. But the process of ensuring that there's a value of every one of our babies, right? And no kid will fail, like that's an attitude and a belief and expectation collectively in a community. And you all know there's communities, and even yours, that their spaces people would absolutely turn this school district over if their children were not having what they needed, right? And we're not, because there's a value of education, right? And there's an expectation. And then the functionality like has to come into play. But when you have that low achieving piece, you gotta really think about what that means. And also understand that even in districts with high achieving students based on test scores and you name it, that again, if we are still having those equity gaps of smaller groups of kids, right? We're gonna talk about data in a little bit, right? When you still have those gaps, then it does call us to say, what can we do to be more effective, to close those gaps, right? And so I'm glad you went to it, because actually as Deborah turned it, I was like, I feel like we didn't talk about that one, right?
I know, and I was
So
just
I'm
thinking of
glad
the time,
you
like
brought
it's,
it up,
yeah,
because
that's good,
it's a hard,
be able to do
it's a
that.
hard one to understand. Because Trustee Baker, when you said dysfunctional, right, like I think of what that means, right? And like the board's gone wild kind of conversation, right? Versus like we just, really aren't operating in the best way we can, right? Like we show up and we're good, but this is an interesting when we talk about equity work, right, in particular. And so I'm glad you brought that up. Glad you brought it up.
Absolutely, but if you want to just look at the research, the Lighthouse study is a really good one to go to, and you just from the Iowa School Board Association actually conducted that and pulled in a lot of people from NSBA and other Lighthouse, where they did the study on the behaviors. And that's again why this was written. Because a lot of times when you would get training about governance, you don't deal with behavior because that's that uncomfortable space. That's just the space that I've always had to be in. Because if we don't, I always am a believer that once board members understand that there are the parameters in which you operate, once they learn, hopefully they will want to do that. Because I want to believe that you volunteered to do this work because you really believe in educating children. Just don't know how to do it because there's no requirement for you to be credentialized like your superintendent. The superintendent has to be degreed in this, if you will. You don't go and get a master's degree in board governance. And so absolutely, there's a research out there. There are also the Fordham Foundation that has done research on, actually is saying that how boards of education can get in the way of the superintendent and team doing their job. But if you follow good governance practices, it works in your favor if you really pay attention, because that's the reason why there's that lane for governing and the lane for the administration. So reason is set up that way. But like I said, if I'm a true believer, once you share the information, most board members do want to do what's right. They just don't know how. So thank you for having me go back to this, because you're right, it is exactly, so your behavior, everything you do is going to impact.
And I really like how Nicole you describe it. Like we can be hunky-dory, very nice to each other.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
But then we are not disrupt the system if there is something is not right.
Right.
And we cannot articulate, but if we have to be brave
Brave
and
enough.
see that. doesn't mean we are not doing it, just
Yeah.
it's slightly different.
Absolutely.
And it's intentional. I think that's the thing, it's
Intentional, yeah.
intentional. And what was the very first slide was about the moral imperative.
More imperative,
Right.
yeah.
So it's a moral imperative that kids have a much different experience, as Deborah said
Mhm.
earlier.
I just,
But it's, you know, going back to that budget example, right? It's like we do a lot of, I don't wanna call it rubber stamping, but we make a lot of decisions about budgets, right? And I use that as a concrete example because when you look over the years, we poured a lot of money into the idea of low achievement, by the way,
Mhm.
right? But English learners, you can go down a list. And ultimately, I think where a governance team stands in is if we don't monitor our budget, right? And ask the questions, not only of superintendent staff, but of ourselves, right? What is the impact of our policy specifically on how we're spending our money, which, I mean, you said that, you know, is being, you know, looking at the finances, then that's where you go back to, okay, are we functional, right? And that's a hard one, because this is, you know, this is so many, you know, it's the education landscape, right? And so it's a hard one.
and so before, go ahead and then.
I think there's one sentence in chapter 6 that perfectly illustrates it, and it was the quickest sentence I ever underlined. It
Which
says,
page are you on?
it's on page 111,
111.
and it says, serving on a board is not a natural activity.
Drop the mic.
There you go. And what does that mean?
Well, in this context, it's talking about, you know, we're all going in with with what we think will be a personal contribution, guidance towards change. But and speaking of functional boards, you don't have individual authority. You need to bring the board with you.
Board members, the team, yes, absolutely, serving on the, and I actually had that underlined in as well. Absolutely, so just 2 more minutes, Nicole. What I want you to do is, in your workbook, okay. We're just gonna answer these questions out loud, so in your workbook on page, the big book on page 58. Actually, 57 just talks about the governance principles, so discuss and agree, the objective is to discuss and agree upon the core governance principles that guide the work of what you do. We've been talking about that. So if you look on page 58, the question that we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I want you to be able to just say it out loud. So we're gonna answer those 3 questions really quickly. So what do we, as if we're talking, what do we believe in about the work of school boards, public education, and the students we serve? What do we believe in? As this board, this team, what do you believe? What do we believe in about the work of the school board in public education and the students we serve? What's your conviction there? What would you be able to tell someone in the community? How would you answer that?
We believe that that every child can succeed.
Okay,
Doesn't
there you
matter what they look like, doesn't matter, you know, who they are, every child that comes into our school district can succeed.
You guys agree with that? Okay, thank you. That was very succinct. I love that. Love it. How do we want our board to be perceived by the community? We talked a little bit about that earlier. So what, if you had to make a statement, how do we want our board to be perceived by our community? What would you say?
I want our community to view us as doing important work and doing it cost effectively, and putting our city on the map to attract more kids into our district. And that is a tough one right there, because, you know, we're losing kids all the time, but sometimes we suffer from an image in the community. You know, for a long time, we've had the shadow of police in our community, and when we trying to recruit people, you know, the students, I've listened to some of the reports that they want police out of our schools, and it didn't come any more prominent when there was all this national news of police brutality. But you know, this has been going on for a generation at least, and that's a real problem. So we want being in the right side of the communities positive image, and it's been very difficult. So that is my estimation about how we are perceived in the community,
Perfect, beautiful said.
and it's very tough.
Absolutely.
I think I wanna make it even simpler than that.
Okay, all right.
I want the board to be perceived, and it's in our name as what we call us, Trustee Murray, Trustee Richardson, Trustee Shea. I wanna be perceived as someone the community can trust with the interest of their children.
That's interesting.
Yeah, doesn't that just put the bow on everything that Matt has been saying? You guys are like all in agreement, absolutely. And so that's work to do, that you have to be very intentional about that. Engaging the community, not being afraid of the hard questions that they may pose of you, or maybe some information that they have that is just not correct. And you have to be able to take it and not be offended by it, or just, because there's history, remember, the rearview mirror. And sometimes that's all people hold on to until you tell them something different.
Can I just remind y'all too, the great work that I was, watched and experienced with you around just even like you mentioned, police and school,
Yeah.
but so many different ways that the trust, right, that is so important. How hard that is, because here's the reality is that you're responsible for an entire district, but kids and parts of the community are not monolithic, right? So then it's that, okay, maybe it's a small group of people who have a need, but the larger group may not have that same need. So how does that group, I usually say, has the least amount of power, how do they trust you, right? And how do they see that you are, your vision is that you want all kids, all kids can learn, for example, right? Like, is that a shared understanding and trust of everybody, which is hard, right? So I appreciate you saying that, because to build that trust, considering this is a system that's been harmful to people, right? I often use the example of when we tell principals hey, go do some home visits, right? And get to know your community, and sometimes you're gonna have to go to folks' houses, but would also remind them there's a process of that, because when they come to the door with that badge, right, they represent a system. And that system has not always been something that people trusted, no matter what you tell them, no matter what piece of paper you put out, no matter the words we say, there is a historic mistrust. So I just love that you brought up that our goal is that our community trust us. And I think you all, set that real, that motion in action, right, for the community. You model it for the community and for the staff, right? I mean, it's very, very real. So I wanna just underscore, thank you for saying that.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult when you have a history of a system that you weren't even responsible for, right? You're all around the 1600s, right? And so, it's
So
just.
agree with you on that, and that's
hard
in page 100. It's the right trustee asking, who do you represent?
Yeah.
And then someone say, wrong question, the right question, it should be, what do you present? So, right, who and what? So that is getting to what you just mentioned.
What do you
It's what do you represent?
Yeah,
in your
absolutely.
organization. So that is will be a great reminder, at least for myself, when we are in the board meeting, we should think about who is not who is what.
What do you represent?
Yeah.
And that helps get you centered back where you should be.
Because we don't know everything. right?
No, and even just finding out what is the pulse of your community, do you really know? That's another commitment to say, we're talking about data, we're going to have to find that out, and it may not be what we think. But once we know, then we know which areas we need. Marginalized groups that say, you never ask us for anything until maybe you guys are running to be reelected, then we hear about you. But it needs to be continuous, that you're engaging with your community. So that's building trust, right? Superintendent, what do you have in that spot? I see your little stuff there. She was like doing her homework, a teacher.
So, type in. So things that haven't been said, I said, we want to be perceived as a well-informed, data-driven, professional, and respectful government staff.
It's definitely our district. We're professional in some ways.
Because you gotta be
In a lot of ways, actually, but that's our superintendent, she sets the tone. And she says, Mr. So-and-so and Mr. this and Mr. that. And I say, And then sometimes she'll say their first name and I said, who's that? Because I won't know, because I know them by how she
Disturbance.
refers to them, even if they're the custodians. So I like that level of, and I actually have had people tell me that they appreciate that. They do. They say, oh, I like you, the way you guys interact when you're having your meetings. I said, oh, thank you, that's nice of you to say.
Absolutely, yeah. So the last question, what principles will support our ability to meet our expectations as well as the expectations of our community? So what are the, remember the principles or your norm, your protocols? What will support your ability to meet those expectations? What do you think?
I'll start.
Go ahead. She's
So I have, and I'll start with my last one, that one of the principles is govern with honesty, sincerity, and integrity.
And you should be able to see that too. Yeah. Not just being able to, I'm honest, keep telling people you're honest and you start wondering, why do you have to keep trying, are you trying to convince yourself or what? Honesty and integrity, absolutely. Anybody else, what are your thoughts?
Well, then we govern in a respectful way, and we treat our colleagues in a respectful way. We have a culture of collaboration and trust.
Absolutely, yeah. And that will be challenged when there are some issues that maybe you don't all agree on. Because people, and I think, Trustee Jay, you mentioned that, oh, you can look like, oh, you're so nice, you like each other as the cameras are going. But wait till you go into executive session. What happens there? What kind of behaviors do you take into there? And so we have to be real with each other, because they're going back to, it's okay not to agree as long as everyone have had the opportunity to put the information out there. And you have to vote your conscience based upon the information, as long as you not basing information, making your decision based upon your heart and that emotional intelligence. Again, it starts there because we're human. So it starts there, but it has to make that trip up here and say, based upon the facts, based upon the trends that we have, the data, different data sources, and what the reality is of the landscape of education, what's the best decision?
That's an important thing you say, because you know what? That invites open-mindedness of your board. Because then if you say, hey, you know, this is what we were given, this is the data that we have, and then, you know, you're appealing to your fellow board members, to their common sense, and realizing the realities of whatever it is you're arguing about. And right now, I just feel that sometimes when we articulate that, sometimes it's misperception. It's not misperception. There's a misperception by other board members. They may not understand why you're saying something. And sometimes it's in support of the superintendent's position, and they'll misconstrue it as something else. And it takes a lot of talking, and if you don't do a lot of talking, it's not gonna you're not gonna resonate.
Right. You have to allow that space for good discussion. And just as you know, if there tends to be a lot of discussion on a topic and it's not time sensitive, perhaps that needs to be tabled to give, because it's saying that all of my colleagues don't have enough information. So if it's not time sensitive, can we table this and make sure we have a study session on this? Because I want to vote for it, but I need to really get more information, and that's okay for you to be able to do that. You have to be okay with that. So what's next as far as the book study? Is May 19th? Are we gonna? Is it 18th? 18th, I mean. I'm looking at chapters 7 through 9. We're going to finish out the book and you know, talk about the governance job, the tools, and the last chapter really rising to the occasion, giving some tips to the board members and the superintendent. But discussing your meetings, again, the governance handbook, that board self-evaluation, that you need to monitor your own performance and having your setting aside time for your professional learning opportunity is the best way. And to really just check in to say, you know, we kind of missed the mark here. Because it's not personal, it's about what's best for this team. We tried this and that didn't work for us because maybe one or two board members, it just didn't support them in the way that we thought, so perhaps we need to take a look. And that's okay, but that's what a governing team does because you're supporting each other. So this concludes my portion of the book study, and taken up most of the time, but as you can imagine, and Trustee Shay and I were out there, we were like, she's excited about this book as I am, you know, she loves it, and of course,
May 18th?
May 18th,
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about the workbook?
you will have,
You guys will send it.
I'll
to
send
us.
it, once I'll look at it to see
Okay.
what assignments I
Alright.
want you to look at,
Yes,
yeah.
I'll write it down, cause
Yeah, no worries, and so,
I lost.
thank you guys again for being engaged and really having some robust conversation.
You always take us there.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm one of your biggest supporters. I really am. If I didn't hurt my leg, I'll turn a somersault straight. You know what's it. So thank you again for, you know, being committed to this work. I really, really appreciate it. And I know your superintendent appreciates it as well. So I'm gonna turn this over to my colleague to close us out. I have one more area to
Just got
discuss.
about a half hour, and it
Half
may
hour.
go faster, actually, depending on, how you answer these questions.
Questions.
Yeah, a pop quiz, no, I'm kidding. So what we wanna do in the last half hour is kind of tie this governance work to the, some of the outcomes you all were working on, which was your equity policy. Obviously you have your statement you put in there, so we're gonna talk a little bit about what do we do with that, since we last chatted. And how we apply it, but also wanna talk to you a little bit about, that governance assessment, particularly that we've kind of walked you through, you may recall this one, the 8 characteristics of effective teams, and so specifically, we wanna front load where we're gonna go next. Okay, so I wanna kind of start with that first and then go into your policy work, if that's okay. And so number 5 is about being a data savvy board. And I always like to ask Ms. Deborah to read this one out loud
Yes.
about what does this mean? So we're gonna kind of unpack this in front load.
How did I put my glasses?
Probably.
Type is so small. Our school board is data savvy through embracing and monitoring quantitative and qualitative data, even when the information is negative. And it's also using data to drive continuous improvement to close equity gaps. That's what a data savvy looks like.
So you may recall, as Deborah shared that, again, qualitative and quantitative, you're monitoring, you're using it, right? And you're embracing it, right? But also, it could be negative, but it's informative. And so you may recall back on November 10th, y'all remember that conversation? We've slept since then, right? But we actually had you go through this assessment, and specifically, this was one where most of you felt like this was the area of growth, right? And so we asked you, where do you think you're doing really well? And so that was where you, just a reminder, what you was doing well was, and I think it was evidence in the book studies. Number 7 was you lead as united teams, with your superintendent, mutual trust within respective roles of the team, engaging in strong equity-focused collaboration. So saying that to say, you have foundation that is like necessary to do equity work. However, if you have areas of growth around data, so this is where we want to make sure you're stronger, because to sustain equity work, to move forward, you gotta be data savvy. This is the part of the work that if you're not a natural kind of data geek or whatever the term is people have, right? Some will say a nerd or that was a gentleman last night,
Yeah.
presenting, right?
He was
He's presenting
happy.
data, he's like, I'm a nerd at
He
this,
loves
so
it.
he just was excited, right? And then others are like, my head hurts, can we just stop, can we talk about this later? And some of you may have differing opinions about data, right? And even what it is, and how do we use it, what do we have, what do we not have? And so what we wanna do is kind of front load what we're gonna do in our next session, okay? Cause it is after 8 and your brains are gonna explode. Probably already did when I said data, right? You're like, please, we're not doing a presentation right now. So Dr. Moore has her staff who's gonna come in and give you a presentation.
No, just kidding.
I'm just joking. However, one of the things we wanna talk about, as a board, and I kind of used this example earlier, like the budget, for example, right? Is, you have a responsibility to ensure that you measure the impact of your budget, right, on student achievement. Well, how do you know that? Like, how do you know? Like, do you just ask your superintendent and you just believe what she says all the time? Yes. However, right, you do need some data, right? Because she is the educational expert. But also she can't tell you everything, right, in a presentation verbally. So when we think about visually, what does data look like, right? It's obviously your superintendent is telling you here are the kind of landscape that's happening in our district, right? That in itself is kind of a data set, but evidence of it, quantitative data. You all have had presentations on student achievement, attendance, discipline. Did I already say absenteeism? Attendance. I feel like I said it twice.
You did say it to me.
I did say it twice, yeah. And ultimately, you've had a lot of like what I call data that shows up in beautiful charts, right? Your staff has worked hard, and over the years, like they have collected data for a long time on some of the outcomes that are happening in your district. Data that, by the way, people get awarded for, right? You've had distinguished schools, correct? Those are all things that show up in that data that's presented to you. So in many ways, you've had some great data presented to you, right? And overall, you're like, okay, we're going in the right direction. A lot of the data is based on test scores, right? It could be some data based on your district benchmarks, but there's this quantitative data, right? Demographic data, you name it, that you've seen, pretty charts, things that the computer can spit out pretty quickly, right? Because we collect it all the time. But then there's also this other thing called qualitative data, right? And because those pretty charts tell us a story that's really important, it may not tell us the whole story. And this is where the data savviness comes in. And we call it qualitative data, where it's more about experiences, feelings, perceptions that you may not see in that pretty chart that says we have 94% of our kids are coming to school every day, right? Was I close? Oh, way up? I was pretty close.
Well, we're a little higher.
Okay, I figured I was. Yeah. But the reality is, I mean, in many ways, there's not enough that shows what that data means, right? And I'm gonna give you an example. I'll use myself, right, in terms of achievement data. So if you looked at test score data, and I was a student in your district, you would not see Nicole Anderson at the top of the test score data. But you might see me at the top of the grading data. How do you make a decision on how to support Nicole Anderson? And then I'll add another layer. If you ask Nicole Anderson her experience, even though she had really good grades, right? She'll tell you my experience was pretty interesting. I didn't like it because I didn't do well on tests. And your district valued tests a lot. So I felt like a fish out of water. I felt insecure. I felt like I didn't want to talk about when I took a test. There was a lot that came with that experience, which then may have impacted other experiences I've had about how teachers interacted with me or how people treated me in terms of making me feel welcome, right? And I can add layers of that data because what I didn't say is in data, you also break down your demographics. And you all remember when No Child Left Behind came out? And one of the shifts we had in education was we started calling out the achievement gap based on demographics. And so even that, you might have had Nicole Anderson in your district, and I identify, I think I told y'all what I identify as, right? Is it my ethnicity? I told y'all?
No.
It's African American. But I say that because I'm joking, because I usually always say that as an African American student, I didn't front load with that. But here's the trick, is you see data for me, but I fall into a category. And you know what, all kids who mark the same box as me, we're not monolithic. Meaning that we all have different experiences, different needs. So being data savvy means I can't make a decision off of data that may not be conclusive, if that makes sense. And I know you do some research too, right? You talk about the instruments and all that stuff that goes with it, but the reality is we have to be data savvy to understand we have to have good data. Some might give an example of like a GPS, right? The way Deborah and I got here was not from remembering how we got here the last time, but it was based on putting the address in the phone. Because if I did not put good data in there, I might have ended up somewhere.
Even though we had detours because the roads were blocked. So
Order my shoes.
that too, yeah,
Couple of
absolutely.
But you said you have to have the data to get you to the place you wanna go. And so here's the hard part as a board. You are gonna ask your staff, right? Like that's the right answer, right? Is we're gonna ask our staff for this data, but what data do we ask for? Right? Because we get data. And we say a board is data savvy and you embrace and monitor qualitative and quantitative data even when the information is negative. My question is, how do we even determine what information is negative, is necessary, like what actually is informing our work and is it helpful? And so when we talk, that earlier question when I mentioned examples of how the system in itself, how we have used data, we've prided ourselves in education. I got data, right? I'm data savvy. But then I always say, okay, but wait, if we have this chronic, ongoing equity gap, achievement gap, you can go through any gap that's chronic and every year it's the same gap over and over and we can predict it, but we're using data. That's really not being data savvy. That's just, we're looking at data and we're like, oh, okay. And we might try to put something here, there, but it's not intentional, it's not strategic, and we're not interrupting. And so when we're talking about data savviness, one of the things we're gonna do with you in our next session is we're gonna practice how do we ask the right questions? How do we ask for the right data? And how do we do it in a way that's not threatening to the staff or a gotcha moment, but also in a way where there's this feeling of, as a board member, I have the information I need so we can make an informed decision. And this is tough because when you have high achievement, right, and you have a lot of positive data, this is where we go, okay, we're trying to look for negative data or look for something different. And in this case, yeah, because what are we doing? Equity work is about all kids, right? But the intentionality of the work, go back to the curb cut effect article we read. It's about really identifying a small group of kids, right? And I say the most vulnerable groups, which could be smaller in size, and really focusing intentionality around resources and monitoring their progress, which actually, when we look at it from that lens, we actually benefit all kids. Which is very hard because go back to the perception of public. What do we want our community to think, right? Well, some of our community members may think that that's not a good thing and they think you're gonna take from one group and give to another. And in some cases, that may be a reality, right? But we don't do that by our feelings. We don't do it by what we think is the right thing to do. We do it by the data. And having a structure in place to be data savvy is what's gonna change, I call it change the game for how you talk about actually closing gaps and then make them stay there, right? Because we've done work like that, right? All districts have done phenomenal work where they put in research-based practice. It originally, it kind of closes the gap for a moment and then you have like a new group of kids come in and then it's back open. So it's like, okay, where did we miss monitoring, right? And even having the right data to measure the impact. So as a board, this should be really important to you all because as you, again, spend quite a number of dollars on programs, curriculum, I can go down the list, right? How are you measuring the impact of that?
So this feels like a aha moment to me because we're not getting all the data. We're getting qualitative, which is what we've asked for.
Yep.
But we're not getting, if we don't look at the whole picture, it's never gonna change.
Yep. So one of the things that was, go ahead.
I do have different thoughts though.
Mhm.
You mentioned about this historical data,
Right.
this data not changed. That's what our equity statement is. We cannot, if we can continue to predict those
Right.
special groups, right?
Yep.
Which is already transferred now. So if we are continue asking more data, the data is not changing. So we give more work for staff to repeating those same
Good point, the same
data.
thing.
So really, it's not about the data.
Yeah.
We already have enough data to tell us there is something is not working or whatever that is. So we need to know what kind of question we need to ask to get to that.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
As you were talking, both of you, the thing that stood out to me is, I think, this is Shantae surmising, Dr. Moore surmising, that sometimes we jump to solutions before we've actually identified what the root cause of the problem is. And so okay, we're gonna try this, we're gonna try that, and we're gonna try that. And an example is we're working with our equity committee, you were there, remember? And they came up with all these solutions after we looked at some data. And Dr. Holt and I were like, well, how do you know that that's the problem you're trying to solve? We need to spend more time asking why are we seeing this, so that we can then address the right problem. And then try to, once we drill down to the root cause, then try to get to what we think the best solution for that is. But I somewhat agree with you about the data piece. If we can predict it, which we all can to this point, I can tell you, we all can tell you which kids are gonna perform high on what, you know, when we think of test scores. And I do think that there's something about, so it's the how, right? And how, what are we, and part of that is having conversations, that qualitative information to paint a picture. Everyone has a story. And you said that at our very first equity network session with all the school boards.
You said something profound about the assumptions we make too, right? And so, yes, we can assume because there's some predictability in this, which is system, right? It's a deep system issue. But what we don't want to do is assume and then make decisions. And that's where I think you go back to, like, do we want the staff to keep giving us the same thing over and over, expecting a different result? Or do we want to kind of shift in thinking about what is that data we're missing and how can we use that to inform our work? Because here's what's funny about this work is that equity work is not always about $1 we have to spend, right? And I'm gonna give you an example of, you remember the article you read, the water system change, you remember that? That was like last year, one of the first ones you did, right? This year, last year, yeah. And remember in this space, we talked about to create sustainable change, you have to not only address the structure, right? The resources, the practice, policy, but also you have to deal with the people in the system. And so relationships is one of those, right? And empowering people is another. And then the mental models, the beliefs. And so I want to just speak to relationships for a moment. When you look at the correlation of positive relationships and student achievement, you will find some clear connections to the higher, more positive the relationships, the higher achievement is. You'll also see a correlation of the poor relationships and lack of feeling, go back to Maslow's RBB, right? Like I don't feel high self-esteem about like my success in school, right? English learners are a great example. We have reclassification processes, right? And over the years, you see kids who are the L-tails, right? And you think about, is it that they can't learn, or is it that and learn to be proficient in English, or is it that there's a system and structures in place that give the message that you can't be successful because you didn't meet the benchmarks and the timelines, and we know kids are brilliant but don't all bloom at the same time. So now just that in itself, there's no money involved with that. It's really more about, as an adult, how can I build this kid's self-esteem? How can I say, I expect I support you, I believe in you, and also I care about you and I love you. That's a relationship issue, and it also is a mindset issue. And so when you talk about where we are as a board, can we ask those questions? Can we ask for that data? And the answer is yes. Do you have the data? Most of the time it's no, and I'm gonna tell you why. It's not because you don't have great staff to provide it to you, right? Typically it's because you don't have a full-blown research department that's here in South San Francisco, right? I mean, literally that's what it is. So we often talk about like having connections with partnerships, the universities, you name it, people have interns, you name it, folks who do this for a living, who don't get a headache by doing this, and also who have time. Your staff honestly doesn't have the time. I'm just gonna be quite honest. If you look at their job descriptions, even folks who are in the, there's usually like an accountability assessment team, you name it, the different positions. Even that, this type of work we're talking about is really difficult. It's a full-time ongoing process because there's a collection of the data, there's creating the instruments, there's analyzing and coding it and making sure it's presentable to you. Then there's the get the trend data and look at it over here. It's a lot. It's overwhelming. And so equity work requires that type of level of work. But the realistic piece that we're going to work on in your next session in May is actually go through a scenario of the staff presenting to you, right? We did give Dr. Moore I wasn't just volunteering that, but I mean, we'll talk a little bit about what that means, but we're gonna talk about some qualitative data that you do actually have. So the things like California Healthy Kids, right? You all collect that kind of stuff. Now, do we look at it and analyze it and look at themes in there? A lot of people don't, because it's a survey we've given every year for I don't know how long now. It has great trend data. There's questions that are asked that you can actually glean from and actually look at the correlation to student achievement, to attendance, right, to behavior. There's a lot of connections, but it's just collecting that and actually using it to inform work. Some folks use Panorama Survey, Youth Truth, Reach. I mean, there's all kinds of versions out there that you all can actually develop yourself, or you can have, partner with folks to do that work. There's also observations, right? So we call them equity walks, but just like you walk campuses, right? And you observe and you actually can see equity in action. There's a specific tool that we have. It's an equity walk tool, and we haven't discussed the date yet, but that's actually something we had talked about doing this year. I think COVID still has made it kind of weird, so it's something we have to carry to next year, like, because people are exhausted and all of that. We can talk about it, but observation is a data point, right? And there's a structure in having principals who walk through classes all the time. What are they looking for, right? And there's things they collect every day that we just don't intentionally document. The work is actually being done, it's just being intentional. Interviews is another one. So when I think of interviews, a great example is discipline, right? So a kid gets in trouble, doesn't follow the rule for whatever reason, there's a conflict, what happens? There's due process, right? And what happens in due process? They see the assistant principal, vice principal, maybe the principal, they have a conversation, we ask what happened, we ask both sides of the story, right? I know that happens in all of your schools. I'm pausing because it doesn't always happen, right?
Both sides.
Like, yeah, but I say that because what happens is we ask kids questions, right? So can we use a process we already have to ask questions that help inform our equity work? And I'm going to tell you a great example. The concept of microaggressions, you ever heard of that term? Right? So those are kind of the ongoing comments or jabs that, a person could feel that just happen ongoingly. Typically, it's folks who are marginalized in some way, shape, or form based on their cultural identity. And after a while, those jabs, start to like jab Deborah and jabber and jabber and jabber comments about her here, that she's not this, she's not. And after a while, she bursts. And guess what happens? She breaks the rules. And without due process, and also without intentionally getting to the root cause, what we might find is that there's some real implications of climate issues at our school that we're not addressing, which is what's behind that discipline data that you see, right? And so when we talk about intentionality, there are specific questions that can be asked during interviews. We can talk to parents. I mean, there's a lot we can get in the processes that already exist. It's just really having an expectation of like taking advantage of the time we have with those that we talk to all the time. Student listening sessions is always a really good one, when you actually have kids who, are kind of in a collected space. Like we've done fish bowls, where you have kids that you can interview in like almost like a panel and have adults kind of listen in. There's a lot of ways to gather qualitative data. But what often happens is that when that data comes back, we don't know how to interpret it. We don't know, like, where is there a theme, or is this just something that's just an outlier, right? Because I don't want to make a decision on one outlier, right? Now, if I keep seeing the same outlier show up, right, over time, then maybe we need to pause and go, wait a minute, because there's some correlation with your quantitative data. So now your head should be hurting right now, right? Yeah, what's been hurt for a while is Deborah's fault, right? But I want you to think about this. Are you a data savvy board? And you already kind of said we got to work on it, right? We want to work on it. But when we think about data in itself, what is it we want to potentially see? What may help you feel like you're more informed when you think about data that could be presented to you? What comes to mind?
Something that relates it to an actual effect that we're seeing, so it's not such an abstract concept.
Yep. So when the data is presented to you, it actually connects like the dots. It's not just here's the data and we're like, okay, I don't know what that means or how that connects to this. So kind of causal data. Yep. Okay.
Data to me is just a very specific snapshot and where the kids are.
Yep.
And at any given moment, when I see a number, I see another number, I formulate a mindset, an idea of where that child is, or where, a few things.
Yeah.
Where the program is, how effective the administrator is, and how effective the teacher is, and all these things come to my mind, but it's so helpful to me to see that. And I had that, I think it was because Dr. Shea came here, because she is a data driven, and she brought it home to us, and I see more data in our reports.
Right.
So, I'm much more comfortable.
Okay.
I'm comfortable because I kind of have an idea instead of just wondering. I go, sometimes I used to say, I wonder how those EL kids, what grades it is that they're actually learning English. All those little things to me form an idea of where the program and everything. It just like brings everything together in my mind.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the word snapshots. I think this is important. And I'm asking some of this so Dr. Moore can really know, like, how should we do this in May, right?
Yeah.
But you mentioned snapshot. I think it's important to think about, okay, like when we see data, a snapshot is just what it is, right? Like I could take a picture of you all right now, and then tomorrow you'd be sitting in the same place and you're gonna have different clothes on, right? You're gonna have different shoes on, right? You're gonna have something different. And so that's why we wanna be careful that snapshots are helpful, especially when we look at the big picture, right? But then what we do wanna see is trend data, right? So trend data is going beyond the snapshot, which is very helpful, but also things that show up over time, right? So that we can start to see, is this something that's just kind of standing out? Because a great example is like COVID, right? Like you're all gonna see test data that just doesn't exist, right? Because of COVID. So there's really like, how do we have, years of data? But also when we think about snapshot, how do you look at this in terms of kind of going back to the causal piece, like, is this snapshot or is this trend data really relevant to what we're collecting around the qualitative data, right? The causal data. So it has to make sense too, because we're talking about two different data sets. So when I say snapshot versus trend data, and then you're looking at like California Healthy Kids Survey, for example, right? Like the responses, if it's a set of fifth grade is one of the grades, right? Fifth, seventh, 11th. Is that still right?
Yeah.
But something like that, right? So that data, you can look at trend data for fifth graders, right? But then does that actually correlate with your student achievement data, knowing that some things are outdated, or cohorts of kids who are fifth grade today are not fifth grade in 2 years when they take it again in seventh grade. So it's like making sure that the data really connects, right? And that's why trend data is important, but the snapshots also help as well. Tell me more about data, like demographic data. Tell me what you want to see there. Is that something that's helpful?
Yeah.
Tell me more, tell us more. Like,
No, I think that's one of the things I was gonna say, trend data. I would wanna know demographics, see which of our kids are succeeding and which aren't, and then the connection would be, why aren't they? I mean, and especially when we do see kids that are, the kids that are part of the achievement gap, would be African American and marginalized communities. And so that would, to me, that would be really important. Also comparing our data with other counties or the state, and oftentimes we get that, but and demographics in those areas. I suspect that we're not the only people with the achievement gap. And but as John was saying, I want to see, okay, so this is the data, not only demographic, that once you said the qualitative, I want that to follow up so that okay, so they're not, well, kind of like you, okay, you said that you were you did well in grades, but poorly in tests. And if they had interviewed you, they would have gotten that information, but they probably didn't have that. And so I'd want to see that. I'd wanna see, socioeconomic, factors in the students' lives. Siblings, are all of the siblings, are we seeing the same trend among siblings as well?
And that's going really deep, huh? But it's interesting data, like I'm sure it's accessible, but the reason why I'm asking you all these things, because one of the other questions we'll ask is, why are you asking for this, right? And is it gonna inform you? And I think that's the hard part about this work, is that there's a lot of data we could ask for, but is it gonna be informative, right? And so for this project, right, in May, like, we're gonna practice this, by the way. So there's gonna be a lot that your district staff is not gonna give you because they won't have, but then there's gonna be several data sets they're gonna give you, and you're gonna be like overwhelmed, because there's a lot of data. Some has already been presented, so it's okay if it's things they've seen, but how do we give you 2 sets of data, quantitative, qualitative, and see where we may make that connection of what is causing it? I think for the sake of the presentation, you probably won't get that piece, because that's the work we have to do. If we knew why, then we probably already have it in, the active things in motion. But, so I heard demographics, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, I guess all of your, disaggregated data, I'm assuming, right? Whatever we have, gender, you name it, the things we have, again, the computer can spit out, right? Remember, there are some things that we don't identify, and this is why asking questions beyond just the data we have in the registration packet about our kids, things like religion, right? Like, we don't ask that question. Are there ways that we can ask that question? It's kind of tricky, because we're not, supposed to, but does religion impact how we learn, how our kids learn? Does religion may impact our attendance? May it impact, and this is something to think about, right? That we kind of get in a pickle, right, in education, because there's things we don't have information about. So what I want you to think of is, what are those things that you may want to learn about? And what are those ways we're gonna talk about, if we don't have that data, how do we get it, right?
So I do have a question. So like you mentioned, all those data, Dr. Moore gave us the training, I forgot which one, May. Very rich information.
Yep.
And then many of the school also presenting their data.
Exactly.
And Principal Wand, his data is so rich and it's so great. So my question is more like, okay, we can get the whole child, right? I get it. We don't want just a student, just one score. So when I was doing my research, I see Ryan reading score is 50%. So, that's not him. He was talented, blah, blah, blah. So then I realized we want the whole child. As a board, how can we get that? That is going to, are those detailed data going to help us set the direction, or they are going to lead us to the how?
Absolutely.
That's the part
Absolutely.
So-
And this is why the data presentation will happen, and we'll actually talk about that. Because I think it's hard when we don't have it in front of us to actually see it. And so again, any data that's been presented, I think, we want to reinvent the wheel. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna have you actually think about, what are the questions you're gonna ask, okay? We're gonna have questions for you as well about what the data tells you as a board. And then ultimately, the short answer is yes. The longer answer we'll actually go through in May around, okay, what does this tell you now? Because I mentioned relationships, right? Is relationships gonna cost you money as a board? To work on the building relationships among staff, students.
Social, emotional.
So possibly, right, you might have some professional learning that comes out of that, right? You might have some practices that may change amongst how principals facilitate their sessions with their staff and what they emphasize, right, at each school. And getting that may cost some money, may not, but it's about you all knowing, and this is where you get to go in the weeds, right? Because it's a study session. But what happens is, in your kind of regular space, when you ask your superintendent and staff for data, right, you're asking with purpose, and you're also asking because we want to get to the bottom of this so we can inform our decisions. And then once we make a decision, then how do we measure the impact of that? So that's kind of the process, but we can't do that without the data first to even know what is the problem. And I think you said there, like, what is the problem? We kind of jumped ahead to say, here's a solution. We don't even know what the problem is because we could be making assumptions. And so that's really important as well. And so kind of in closing, because I know you all are at the end of your space, what we're also gonna do, and I want to just make sure that you got time, since time ran out, you get a little reprieve. But your equity policy, we're gonna tie into that conversation, because remember, you're gonna always operate the policy level. So even though you're gonna get great data, you're gonna talk to the staff, you're gonna ask questions, we're gonna get kind of in the weeds a little bit. When it's all said and done, remember, we're gonna go back up to where we operate, which is policy, and the data, we're gonna connect it to how do you measure the impact of your policy through the data you just heard. So that's gonna be where you'll make those connections, I think, so you'll see kind of the connection of how does it inform, our professional learning, our discipline practices, you name it. So Dr. Moore, I'm giving you a little hint and heads up as where it's going, so if you got the other data that will inform their policy, there's a bonus, but we can talk offline, so because what we don't want is the staff to have a huge project just for the study session.
Yeah.
But it is work you already do, so that's the good news, is it can really be a study session that's productive for the staff too.
And really help the board, because we will challenge you too on asking, what questions to ask, and then why are you asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's gonna be fun.
It's gonna be fun, but
practice.
to help you, because you don't want to, if you just want to know,
Yeah.
because you wanna know, that's not top priority for staff, that's just, it's not that you can't get it, if it's available, but it's not priority. You wanna just make sure you're being able to articulate, why are you asking?
So we'll follow up, because you're not gonna remember much of what you heard from what I just said. You'll remember all about the book study though. No, but literally what we're gonna do is go into that as your next steps, and then we will give you some tools also moving forward on how to continue this work beyond just what we've done with you. So any final questions or comments about next steps, what you did today?
This is exciting.
Oops. Oh, probably.
Just do it.
Well, President Lee.
All right, saying thank you to our two guests tonight, and seeing as we have no further business on the agenda, I declare us adjourned at 8:32.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I was gonna